Martin Gardner sat on the porch of his desolate home, clutching a photo album he had received years after the tragic day. That album had become a symbol of his loss, a living testament to a terrible tragedy. Martin's gaze stopped at the pictures of his small and innocent children, Talen, Sai, Savi, and Yazi. These pictures were all he had left of his happy days. As he looked into their faces, he could almost hear their children's voices filling this house with laughter and warmth once upon a time. Martin's first child was Talen, who was only 4 years old. To his father, he was the light of his life. The man dreamed of spending all his free time with him, teaching him everything he knew, and drinking beer with him in the future, when Talen would be a real grown man, and Martin himself would be gray and important. Little Saya, who was only 3 years old, always ran to her father when he came home from work, remembering to take her cloth doll with her. She always asked Martin to give her and her doll a kiss before she went to bed. This always brought a smile to her father's face, and he performed this sweet ritual with seriousness and respect. Savi, a 2-year-old girl, was silent and intelligent. She loved to flip through books and watch animal movies. Martin often took her on his lap and read her favorite stories to her. He saw in her the potential of a future intelligent and serious woman who would achieve great heights in life. And Yazi was the youngest, still a very tiny baby with deep black eyes. When Martin looked into her eyes, he saw a vast world there. Those eyes were exactly like those of her mother, Shanynthia Gardner. Martin remembered how happy he was that she had given him this beautiful world full of love, comfort, and children's laughter. But that world was shattered one fateful day. Shenia Gardner was born in the late 80s in Memphis, the American state of Tennessee. Little is known about her early years, other than the fact that she was the daughter of Eleanor Snodgrass, who once inhabited the cozy cabins of Madison, Alabama. Shaninia's childhood and youth flowed as routinely as any other girl's. At that time, she was a young brunette with curly hair, slender and beautiful. The girl was always surrounded by loyal friends and displayed bright talents. Shanynthia was filled with a true creative spirit. She had a unique gift of composing songs. Music was her passion, and singing was her way of expressing herself. Her vocal abilities caught the attention of the locals, and she became a local celebrity. However, singing was only one of her many hobbies. Shanynthia was fascinated by the world of fashion and photography. She looked great in front of the camera and could turn everyday moments into works of art. Despite all these colorful hobbies, inside Shanynthia was a woman full of charity who always found time for religion. She often attended church and carefully cared for her family. Everything in Shanynthia's life seemed set and promised a bright future. Shanynthia was only 14 years old when she met Detrail Clayton. It started with a casual introduction through mutual friends. They immediately found common ground and became friends. By the time they grew up and graduated from high school, their relationship became more serious, and the young people officially became a couple. Shanynthia and Detrail spent a lot of time together. Everyone considered them serious and stable young people. However, there were some questionable episodes in their record. Both were seen in minor offenses, such as traffic violations or disorderly conduct on the streets. In 2008, things got more serious. Detrail was accused of assaulting a woman, and although it was done unintentionally, he was facing serious punishment. The guy got lucky, and soon all charges against him were dropped. Shanynthia and Detrail did not formalize their relationship, but they lived together. In the same year 2008, the couple had a son, who was named Dallin. Shanynthia became a caring mother, not only to him, but also to Detrail's 2 children from his previous relationship. Sonia Clayton, Detrail's mother, always saw Shanynthia not just as a woman in love with her son, but as part of her family. Shanynthia was noted for her devotion and care for her children, which made her special in Sonia's eyes. However, the lovers' relationship was not a long one, and little is known about what exactly happened between them. However, even after the breakup, they continued to maintain some distant communication. To Detrail, Shanynthia remained a good wife and a caring mother. When Dallin was just 2 years old, Shanynthia was involved in a small incident. It was a minor infraction, perhaps a parking ticket or a minor argument of no great importance. It was also insignificant compared to what the future held for her. Marrying Martin Gardner was a new phase in Shanintia's life. Fate had led her to this man who appeared to bring joy and stability to her life. Shanynthia, on the other hand, won Martin over with her kindness and love for children. In her eyes, he saw an ocean of feminine tenderness and wisdom. Their story developed rapidly. In September 2013, they decided to start their life together and moved into an apartment complex in southeast Shelby County. The wedding was just the beginning of a new phase of their life together. Shortly after the celebration, they had their first child, baby Talon. And in 2014, little Saya was born into the world. Soon, 2 more girls, Savi and Yazi, came along, making their big family even happier and busier. In total, Martin and Shanynthia had 4 children together, as well as 1 child from the young woman's previous relationship. For the young mom, children always came first, and she enjoyed working part-time at the children's hospital. Moreover, she was actively involved in a center that raised funds to help children. It was her calling, and she gratefully dedicated her life to helping those in need on the cusp of a terrible event. Friday, July 1st, 2016, an ordinary day that didn't portend anything out of the ordinary. Around noon, Shanynthia was on the phone with her husband, Martin. Her voice was calm, as it usually is. She told her husband that she was going to watch a movie with the kids. There was nothing to indicate that something terrible was going to happen on this ordinary day. And then, at that moment when the spouses were having a quiet conversation, an incomprehensible madness began to happen. Suddenly, Shanynthia changed. She took a kitchen knife and went into the living room. There, she attacked her own 6-month-old daughter, Yazi. The defenseless little girl who couldn't fight back was caught in a terrible trap. Her life was cut short in an instant at the hands of her most loved and closest person. Dallin, the oldest of the children, he was only 7 years old, witnessed this nightmarish scene. A terrible tragedy played out before his eyes, for which he was too young to understand. The boy thought only one thing: he must do something to save his younger brother and sisters. Panicked and desperate, he ran out of the house. Shanynthia didn't stop there. The young woman followed her son out of the house, armed with a knife, ready to continue her nightmarish plan. She rushed after Dallin, but the man, terrified and desperate, screamed so loudly that he attracted the attention of the neighbors. A couple of neighbors heard his screams and quickly went outside to see what was going on. They found themselves witnessing a nightmare that did not settle in their nines. Realizing that Dallin was being watched, Shanynthia went no further. However, the whole horror was not over yet. Shanynthia returned to the house where Savi and Talon were waiting for her. Distraught, she went up to the bedroom where the little ones were. It was the last moments of their innocent lives. Meanwhile, those who witnessed the nightmare didn't waste a second. They quickly called emergency services, asking for help and rescue for little Dallin and his younger siblings. At that moment, none of them could have imagined the tragic consequences that awaited this peaceful street. Sheriff's personnel arrived on the scene and were confronted with an eerie scene. Inside the home at 7449 Southern Hill Drive, they found a bloodied Shanynthia and her 4 children lying motionless, bereft of life. The sight left everyone in shock. Shanynthia sat with her cell phone in her hands. She slowly dialed the number of Martin, her husband. Her voice sounded quiet and cold as she confessed to killing her children. The tragedy that had unfolded in their lives was the horrific event that would forever be remembered in this quiet neighborhood. By the time the prosecutor's office and special unit arrived on the scene, it was all over. There was only an eerie silence in the house that had once been the place of the happy Gardner family. Blood and horror lurked in every corner. The investigators had a bloody knife in their possession, silently bearing witness to the gruesome incident. Chaplains arrived to help and were shocked by what had happened, as well as specialists ready to assist Dallin. The horror he had endured required immediate intervention. While the necessary information was gathered and investigations were underway, law enforcement asked residents to stay inside their homes and not go outside. Some did not need this request. They still felt fear and uncertainty. Their home seemed to be the only safe place. A major operation forced sheriff's officials to close off access to the apartment complex, including the golf area and country club. As for Shanynthia, she was apprehended and taken into custody without bail. Her trial was immediately scheduled for July 5th. society could not remain indifferent to these horrific events unfolding in the life of Shanynthia Gardner. No matter how monstrous she was portrayed, she was a mother and a partner who radiated love, care, and joy, according to Michelle Jamont, her co-worker. Michelle vigorously defended Shanynthia on social media, speaking out about the unfairness of the allegations. She also brought up an important aspect: postpartum depression. Cases like this have sparked discussion, and Dr. Joel Reisman, a psychiatrist at the University of Tennessee Medical Center, confirmed that the killing of children by their own mother is rare and usually accompanied by mental illness. He also pointed out the lack of mental health funding in the state, which leaves many families without the support they need. Dr. Diane Barnes, a psychology and postpartum health specialist, explained the difference between postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis, emphasizing that they are completely different conditions with different symptoms. And while Shanynthia's exact condition required further investigation, Dr. Barnes doubted that women in a state of postpartum depression would commit such acts. She leaned toward the idea of psychosis. The investigation in Shanynthia Gardner's case was arduous. Her defense attorney, Craig Morton, became her defense attorney, but he chose not to comment on the case to the media in the early stages, believing it was too early for such discussions. On July 5, 2016, at the court hearing, Shanynthia remained silent, appearing only via video link. Judge Lois Lambert asked her questions, but the young woman did not utter a single word. After the trial, Shanynthia was sent to the Mental Health Institute. Shanynthia's next of kin came to the courthouse, but declined to comment to reporters. Morton's attorney and prosecutor Jennifer Nichols planned to file a motion to preserve evidence in the case, including information gathered from social media. January 2017 brought formal charges against Shanynthia on 4 counts: aggravated child abuse, aggravated murder with a deadly weapon, aggravated child abuse, and child neglect. The mysterious and gruesome investigation continued, and the community was left waiting for justice and answers to many questions. The hearing included testimony from Shanynthia's loved ones. On that fateful day, Sonia, Detrail's mother, was undoubtedly shocked to learn of the terrible tragedy. She immediately arrived on the scene in a desperate search for her grandson, Dowan. Sonia maintained that what had happened had nothing to do with the young woman she had once known. She expressed her belief that something supernatural, perhaps of a diabolical nature, was behind it all. As time passed, however, and the initial shock began to wear off, Sonia began to speculate about possible motives. She speculated that perhaps the young couple was in the process of divorce. For fear of being alone, caring for 5 children, Shanynthia might have come to the terrible decision to end it all. But despite these reflections, Sonia found it hard to believe. To her, the Shanynthia she had once known was far from a person capable of such a horrible act. Detrail, Dowan's father, also refused to believe in Shanynthia's guilt. He admitted that although he was never his son's guardian, he was always able to visit him after his relationship with Shanynthia ended. But November 2014 was the last time he saw his son. He noticed that each time Shanynthia became more and more radical in her actions and decisions. Every attempt he made to contact his son failed, and he was simply not allowed to be involved in his life. But in fact, Shanynthia's friends and family had long ago noticed that a completely unexpected upheaval had taken place with her. The young woman began to experience a strange discomfort, but gradually developed into deep anxiety, paranoia, and even worse, panic attacks. Her behavior became erratic and unpredictable, and many people began to suspect that it might be related to postpartum depression. This came as a real shock to those around her, as Shanynthia seemed to be a strong and dependable woman. She had always been the one in control, but now she seemed to have lost her footing. Her sudden change in behavior made many people wonder why this tragic situation happened. The first signs of strange behavior began in March 2015, and none of her friends and family could figure out what was going on. One day, Shanynthia left work early and picked up her children. With 5 children in the family car, she headed down an unknown road leading away from their home. At the time, her husband Martin assumed that his wife had gone for a walk and to unwind in some park. This was quite typical of her daily routine. However, as the hours passed, she never returned home. Very disturbed, Martin decided to put out an APB for his wife. At the wheel, with 5 children in the cabin, Shanynthia headed east and traveled more than 74 miles separating Memphis from Corinth, but she didn't know anyone here, and she had no apparent reason to go there in particular. She was later found in the emergency room of St. Francis Hospital, but police never revealed how or why she ended up there. Shallow cuts were found on her neck and one of her wrists. If she was trying to take her own life, her only witnesses were her children, but they were too young to realize what was happening. Shanynthia was eventually returned home by authorities, but after that, even more bizarre behavior began. She told Martin that someone was threatening her and their family. Her husband was shocked, as Shanynthia provided no details about who it might be or why, and there were no prior instances of such threats. Also, when Shanynthia was with family and friends, she started complaining about her work and workload. She claimed that she felt very bad about it. Soon, she began to claim that some of her co-workers wanted to harm her. Despite these abnormalities, Shanynthia showed no signs of abuse or violence toward her children or others. The long wait for trial was not an easy one, and it was severely delayed due to the numerous psychiatric evaluations the defendant had to undergo. Added to this came the COVID pandemic, which only added to the length of the trial, longer than anyone expected. In 2021, the non-jury trial finally began. The defense focused its strategy on Shanintia's mental illness argument. The prosecutors acknowledged her said mental illness, but they insisted that the defendant was still capable of understanding the difference between right and wrong and was aware of the illegality of her actions. Finally, a Shelby County criminal court judge, James, rejected the defense, and in December 2021, Shanynthia Gardner was found guilty of all charges against her. In February 2022, Shanynthia, 34, appeared in court for sentencing, with her husband Martin also in attendance. Judge James sentenced her to life in prison for each count of murder, as well as 15 years for each additional count of child abuse and neglect. Shanynthia will only be able to apply for the possibility of parole after serving a total of 51 years in prison. Given the 5 years she spent in prison prior to sentencing, Shanynthia will be eligible for parole in approximately 46 years, when she will be 80 years old. After sentencing, the prosecutor stated that he agreed with the decision because it was consistent with their desire to achieve justice for Martin and his children. In turn, Martin expressed some relief upon learning that Shanynthia would never be able to harm any children again. Sonia, Dallin's grandmother, stood among people, including neighbors, family members, and law enforcement officers, during an evening vigil at the apartment complex where the family lived. In remembrance of the innocent victims, those who came to say goodbye held red and white candles and prayed several times for the souls of the departed. The Reverend Pastor of the Baptist Church noted that the vigil was the beginning of a healing process for the entire community, because in the end, the only thing in the hands of those present was a desire to support the surviving baby and his father and help them through this difficult moment. DeTrail did not attend the memorial ceremony. On his behalf, Sonia told the media that he was too overwhelmed with anger to show up for the ceremony. The president and CEO of the children's hospital where Shanynthia worked also expressed their condolences on behalf of everyone at the hospital. Martin's colleagues set up a social media account to help him with funeral arrangements for his 4 children. During the ceremony, while saying a few words about his children and family, Martin showed incredible fortitude and nobility in his words. In his final speech, he emphasized that his home was happy when his children and Shanynthia were there, and that this is how it will remain in his memory forever. Why was the beauty queen robbed of her life? They say beauty is a powerful force capable of saving the world, but unfortunately, it does not guarantee happiness and can sometimes lead to trouble. Beautiful girls are always the center of attention, usually with many admirers. However, renowned beauties and crowned beauty queens are not only surrounded by fans and patrons, but also by many envious people, ill-wishers, and obsessed stalkers capable of unpredictable actions. The case of the tragic demise of the young Kimberly Oliveira shocked all of South America, becoming one of the most shocking and resonant. The girl, who won several beauty contests and was a contender for the title of Miss Brazil, was brutally and treacherously deprived of life. She dreamed of fame and recognition, but they turned out to be very different from what the model had imagined. Her name indeed became widely known far beyond her native country, and people admired Kimberly's beauty and youth. At the same time, they were horrified by the terrible manner in which she ended her life in the prime of her years, and by the many heights she could have still reached. Who was Kimberly Oliveira? Kimberly Karen Mota de Oliveira was born on February 26, 1998, in the small yet cozy Brazilian town of Manacor, located in the municipality of the same name in the state of Amazonas. She was the eldest child and the only daughter in the family of Naila and Jose Oliveira, and was raised alongside her two younger brothers. The girl had Brazilian, Spanish, and Indian roots, and it can be said she won the genetic lottery. She possessed incredibly attractive looks that drew the eyes of those around her like a magnet. Kimberly had flawless skin, luxurious thick hair, a dazzling smile, and a slender feminine figure. The beauty was used to universal attention, admiration, and adoration, with her peers and adults alike comparing her to an angel. From a young age, she engaged in dance and gymnastics, loved swimming, and meticulously took care of her appearance and manners. At the same time, she excelled in school, read a lot, regularly visited the theater, and studied foreign languages. Already in her teenage years, Kimberly began participating in various beauty contests, where she won prizes and also modeled in advertisements and clothing catalogs. In high school, she firmly decided she wanted to connect her life with the modeling business, especially since her mother Naila was also a recognized beauty in her youth and won several titles, including Miss Manacor. However, Naila later married and sacrificed her modeling career for the sake of her family and raising 3 children. Kimberly realized she had outstanding physical attributes and loved to pose in front of the camera. She was featured several times in fashion magazines, participated in shows, and won the official title of the most beautiful girl in her hometown. She also reached the finals of the Miss Amazonas contest in 2017, prepared to participate in it again, and was a serious contender for the title of Miss Brazil. In case of victory, she could have gone on to prestigious contests like Miss World or Miss Universe. However, Oliveira understood well that to win at such a high level, beauty and charisma alone were not enough. Contestants there are also evaluated based on their intelligence, education, moral qualities, charitable activities, and so on. Additionally, contenders for the Beauty Queen crown must not have criminal records, legal issues, or photo shoots in the nude style. Kimberly actively managed her social media accounts, where she promoted a healthy lifestyle, sports, and proper nutrition. She also detailed her life, posted shots from various photo shoots, and simply interacted with her growing number of followers. By 2019, her page on a popular social network had several tens of thousands of followers. The model aimed to be a role model, inspiring and motivating her followers. At 19, she decided to pursue higher education and aimed to enter medical school to become a dentist. To achieve this, Kimberly moved to Manaus, the capital and largest metropolis of the state of Amazonas, where her maternal uncle Henry lived. After successfully passing the necessary exams and enrolling in the university, she moved from a quiet, cozy place to a huge, bustling city, settling in her relative's house. Oliveira quickly adapted to her new environment, made friends, and successfully combined her studies with sports, advertising shoots, and participation in various projects. Persistent and cunning admirer. In her free time from studies and photo shoots, Kimberly usually spent time with her friends, often hanging out in various places as a large group. In the fall of 2019, Kimberly and her close friend were enjoying themselves at a popular club when a handsome young man named Rafael Fernandez Rodriguez approached them. He wanted to get to know Oliveira and offered to buy her a cocktail. However, the model, accustomed to the heightened attention towards her and knowing how to handle such situations, politely declined, noting that she was not alone and didn't need anything. Rafael simply apologized for the disturbance and left, But the girl didn't yet know that this entire scene was premeditated and orchestrated by the stranger. The fact was that the man had been following the young model's social media page for about a year, closely observing her, but never attempting to make contact until that day. He knew well the places the beauty frequented and decided to act, pretending to see her for the first time and merely wanting to meet her. At that time, Rodriguez was 31 years old, recently divorced, and obsessed with the idea of meeting and starting a romance with Kimberly. Learning from posts and stories that the model had moved to Manaus, he also moved to the city, where, having a legal education, he quickly found a high-paying job in corporate law and rented a spacious apartment in an elite residential complex. Then, he began implementing his plan, closely monitoring Oliveira, waiting for the right moment to approach her. After the unsuccessful attempt to meet at the nightclub, Raphael decided to step out of the shadows and started sending the girl private messages on social media, inviting her on a date. He also actively commented on and liked all the posts the model shared on her profile. For several months, she ignored the persistent follower, paying him no special attention as she regularly encountered similar situations, and this guy didn't particularly stand out. Rodriguez then changed his tactics, adding Kimberly's classmates, friends, and even relatives to his friends list, trying to befriend them and gain their trust. This plan succeeded, and he managed to obtain her phone number from one of her close acquaintances. The obsessed stalker then began messaging her in instant messengers, suggesting they meet. The man studied the object of his admiration well, knowing what she liked, where she went, what music she listened to, and so on. He started attending outdoor training sessions occasionally conducted by Oliveira herself, and only there did he manage to catch her attention. They finally talked, and after that, they began regularly calling and messaging each other on social networks. Raphael managed to pique the girl's interest as he was well prepared. Despite a significant age difference of almost 10 years, an easygoing friendship developed between the young people. The man cautiously approached, trying to court and please the girl beautifully without scaring her off, but also not letting her forget about him. His tactic worked perfectly, and in March 2020, Kimberly and Raphael declared themselves a couple and started officially dating. Obsessed owner, the attractive and romantic guy who did everything to win the beauty's affection, revealed his true colors as soon as they began dating. He started literally monitoring his beloved's every move, wanting to know everything about where she went, whom she communicated with, who messaged her, and so on. Initially, the girl even found it amusing, as no one had ever restricted or controlled her before. However, the situation worsened daily, and Raphael's behavior became increasingly intrusive and aggressive. He now decided which photos Kimberly could post on social media, when and if she could go live, whom to respond to and whom to block. Soon she grew tired of this, attempted to set personal boundaries the guy couldn't cross, and they had a serious argument. Rodriguez had to apologize, and to make amends, he invited the girl to a luxurious restaurant and gave her a huge bouquet of flowers. He repeated this after each quarrel to avoid losing Oliveira, whom he had pursued so long and persistently. The man gave her expensive gifts, organized romantic dates at trendy spots, and said he would never leave her. Kimberly increasingly complained to her friends about her boyfriend, saying she couldn't take a step without his permission and approval. Raphael forbade her from talking to guys even at the university, took her phone without permission, checked calls and messages, and then created scenes. Sometimes, he got so furious that the girl feared for her safety. Her friends confirmed this was abnormal, advised her to have a serious talk with the guy, and if nothing changed, to leave him before it was too late. Kimberly also understood she didn't want to live like this, knowing a brilliant modeling career, diploma defense, world travels, photo shoots for fashion magazines, fame, and recognition awaited her. She didn't want to give it all up for uncertain relations with an unstable and obsessed owner who restricted, controlled, and sought to possess her like an object. Final decision. By early May 2020, after 2 exhausting months of relationship, Kimberly decided to break up with Raphael but was unsure how to do it without triggering his anger. She waited for the right moment to announce the breakup, but it was no longer possible to delay. On May 10th, Brazil celebrated Mother's Day, a holiday Kimberly always spent with her mom. However, due to restrictions imposed by the raging COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, she couldn't travel to her hometown to congratulate her mother. Instead, Kimberly posted a photo of them together with a touching caption and words of gratitude. At the time, Nayla was in the hospital undergoing treatment after being diagnosed with cancer. After posting, Kimberly went for a run in the park with a few friends, including Raphael. Everyone who saw the couple that day claimed they weren't arguing, were talking nicely, and no one except her close friend knew that the model planned to break up with her boyfriend that evening and had already made her decision. At noon, Kimberly called her uncle and told him she would spend the day with her best friend Gabriella, but would return home to sleep. Later, she called Henry again, asking him not to lock the front door because she forgot her keys and promised to be back by midnight. Henry did as asked and went to bed, fully trusting his niece. In the evening, while at her friend's place, Kimberly rehearsed what she planned to tell her boyfriend. She carefully chose words to avoid hurting his feelings and to prevent any outbursts of anger, although it was very difficult. Finally, she seemed to have found the right delicate phrases and was ready for the important conversation. Around 9 in the evening, Raphael arrived at her friend's house in his brand new white Audi. Kimberly walked out to him with a smile, waved goodbye to Gabriella, and got into the passenger seat next to the driver. No one saw the girl alive again. Mysterious disappearance of the couple. On the morning of May 11th, when Henry woke up, he realized his niece hadn't come home and became very worried. Kimberly always told him when she would return and informed him if she planned to stay over at a friend's place. He tried to contact her, but her phone was off. He then called Gabriella, who said that Kimberly left with her boyfriend and hadn't been in touch since. Henry called Raphael, but he didn't answer, which was very strange. It soon became clear that the girl didn't show up for her university classes, something she had never done before. By noon, convinced that his niece was missing and no one had seen her, Henry went to the police to file a report about the disappearance of the girl and her boyfriend. However, the authorities just laughed at him, saying Oliveira and her boyfriend were adults and could go wherever they wanted without telling anyone. Henry and a few friends of the missing girl began searching on their own. They first went to Raphael's apartment, but no one answered the door. His car was also missing from the parking spot. Everything indicated that the couple had indeed gone somewhere together, but Kimberly's close ones knew she would never disappear without telling anyone. By evening, Henry called his sister Nayla and told her what had happened. He didn't want to worry his relative, who was battling a severe illness, but he couldn't wait any longer since she had also been trying to contact her daughter all day and suspected something was wrong. He tried to reassure her that nothing bad could have happened to Kimberly since she didn't keep bad company, had no harmful habits, and avoided trouble. Kimberly's friends began massively posting her photos on their social media pages and various groups, asking for any information about the girls or her boyfriend, Raphael's, whereabouts. Since the young model was quite a popular figure, news of her disappearance went viral, and thousands of followers joined the search. However, this yielded no results. Grim discovery in a locked apartment. The police only began to act on May 12th, nearly 2 days after the couple's disappearance. A search warrant was obtained for Raphael's apartment, as it might contain clues or hints about the whereabouts of the young people. But what the authorities discovered when they forced open the locked door and entered the premises shocked everyone. Kimberly was in one of the rooms, but unfortunately, there was nothing that could be done to save her. The lifeless body of the young girl lay on the bedroom floor in a large pool of her own blood, covered with a sheet. There were also several large bloodstains on the bed, and blood traces and smears on the carpets and floor coverings were found in almost every room. It was evident that the criminal had panicked, trying to cover up the evidence, but soon realized it was futile, and simply fled, turning the air conditioner on full blast to slow down the body's decomposition so no one would suspect a body was in the apartment. The forensic experts found 4 stab wounds on the victim's body, 2 to the chest and 2 to the neck. The weapon used was a large kitchen knife, which lay in the next room with traces of blood and clear fingerprints of the criminal. The perpetrator didn't even try to get rid of it or wipe off the traces, but just threw it on the floor. Judging by the absence of defensive wounds or signs of a struggle on the body, the girl was most likely attacked suddenly when she least expected it. It appears the attack happened on the bed, but she was finished off on the floor with a blow to the neck, severing her carotid artery. The apartment owner was nowhere to be found, and his documents, some personal items, bank cards, and car keys were missing. The state of the rooms indicated he had left in a hurry. If Raphael was previously considered missing, he was now reclassified as the prime suspect in the brutal crime. But where to look for him, and could he have left the country by now? Hunt for the fugitive criminal. The forensic examination confirmed that the fingerprints on the crime weapon belonged to the missing Rodriguez. No traces of other people were found in the apartment. At the time of the crime, only the criminal and the victim were present, dispelling any remaining doubts about the man's guilt. Alerts about Raphael were immediately sent to police stations across the state and circulated widely on social media, noting that a dangerous criminal was being sought and requesting any information about his whereabouts. Additionally, a search was launched for the white Audi that the suspect drove. Detectives understood that every minute counted, so they checked all reports from vigilant citizens. On May 13th, news came that a white Audi was found crashed in a ditch by the roadside in the neighboring state of Caracaraí. The car, as it turned out, belonged to the suspect. Surveillance footage showed Raphael driving at high speed. It seems he lost control. The car veered off the road and overturned. However, it was unknown how badly the driver was injured and where he went. There was speculation that he might have hitchhiked to the Venezuelan border and fled there. Failed attempt to cross the border. It was soon learned that the injured man in the accident was indeed picked up by a passing car and taken to a nearby town. There, Rodriguez took a taxi to the nearest bank, withdrew almost all the money from his account, and then took the same taxi to the border town of Boa Vista. From there, he attempted to cross the border into Venezuela on foot to escape justice. Fortunately, his attempt to leave the country was unsuccessful. Due to restrictions related to the worsening COVID-19 situation, the man was not allowed to pass. He could have returned to Boa Vista, a city of nearly 300,000 people, and tried to blend in, but detectives found out that the suspect preferred to hide in the wooded area, waiting for things to quiet down. After a couple of days of searching, the fugitive was found deep in the forest, in a small hut almost camouflaged by the surrounding environment. However, the arrest didn't go smoothly. The police were suddenly attacked by men wielding machetes, whom Rodriguez had hired from the local population for personal protection, paying them generously in cash. Fortunately, there was no bloodshed, as the authorities showed their badges and explained they were there to apprehend a dangerous criminal. They informed the bodyguards that aiding the criminal could result in serious legal consequences for them as well. Raphael's version. By the time the main suspect was arrested, the police already had all the evidence of his guilt, so denying it was pointless. Surveillance footage showed Kimberly getting into his car, arriving at his place, going up to his apartment, and then Rodriguez leaving alone a few hours later, fleeing the scene. Interestingly, in all the videos, the couple appeared calm, chatting pleasantly and smiling. Raphael left the apartment calmly, clearly not feeling fear, remorse, or guilt. Under the weight of evidence, the suspect admitted his guilt, but presented a rather strange version of the events of that day. According to him, he and his beloved decided to have a romantic evening and went to his apartment for that purpose, where they had intimate moments. Afterward, Kimberly went to take a shower, and Raphael decided to check her phone, finding out she had been chatting with several guys on social media. He wanted to confront her directly about it, but first went to the kitchen and took a large knife, hiding it under a pillow. He claimed he did not intend to harm her, but only wanted to scare her if she tried to deceive him. When Oliveira came out of the shower and lay on the bed, Raphael immediately started questioning her about whom she was communicating with. The girl just smiled and said she wasn't talking to any men. This infuriated Rodriguez. He realized his beloved was lying and mocking him. He grabbed the knife and quickly inflicted 2 blows to her heart. The victim didn't have time to understand or resist, but slipped off the bed onto the floor, where the attacker delivered 2 more fatal blows to her neck. Realizing what he had done, Raphael tried to cover up the traces, but quickly understood it was futile. He couldn't remove the body from the apartment unnoticed, and the suspicion would still fall on him. So, he simply covered the body with a sheet and turned the air conditioner on full blast to keep the room as cold as possible, slowing the decomposition process. Witness testimonies. Kimberly's best friend, Gabriella, testified as a witness, providing a completely different version of events. According to her, Kimberly had finally decided to break up with her aggressive and mentally unstable boyfriend that evening. She had spent a long time carefully preparing what to say, knowing that one wrong word could send Raphael into a rage. Gabriella insisted that Kimberly would not have been intimate with a man she planned to leave, and certainly wouldn't have joked about messaging other guys, knowing his reactions were always unpredictable. Another witness was the defendant's ex-wife, who confirmed that Rodriguez was a cruel person who suffered from uncontrollable fits of anger, affecting everyone around him. His aggression was the primary reason for their divorce. Raphael's only supporter was his mother, Fatima, who claimed that he was a good person and never meant harm to anyone. She blamed Kimberly, her ex-daughter-in-law, and everyone else for driving her boy to sin. Lenient sentence and its aftermath. Rodriguez's father did not live to see the trial. Realizing what kind of monster he had raised, the elderly man chose to end his life by stepping in front of a train. His widow insisted it was an accident, saying her husband felt unwell and accidentally fell onto the tracks. However, surveillance footage clearly showed otherwise. The defendant's legal team pushed the narrative of his insanity, repeatedly delaying the case by requesting new psychiatric evaluations. Ultimately, Raphael was deemed capable of standing trial for his heinous act. The trial began in October 2021, nearly a year and a half after the brutal crime. Despite the overwhelming evidence of his guilt, Raphael received a surprisingly lenient sentence of only 14 years in prison, later reduced by another year. This outcome was due to the defense's successful argument that their client had acted in a fit of rage when he committed the crime. As a result, instead of life imprisonment, he received a significantly lighter punishment. On the day of the sentencing, October 28th, Kimberly's mother, Nyla Oliveira, passed away after a long battle with cancer. She had followed every court session via video call from her hospital bed, where she was in very poor condition. Just a few hours after the verdict was announced, her heart stopped. The Oliveira family lost 2 beloved members in less than a year and a half. First their cherished sister and daughter, then their loving wife and mother. Meanwhile, Rodriguez's mother vowed to wait for her son to be released from prison, as he was the only close family she had left after her husband's death. In March 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic hit the United States. The entire world began to shut down, and people were gripped with shock and fear of an unknown disease. On March 23rd, 12-year-old daughter Gretchen Anthony, who was visiting her father at the time, received a text message from her mother. "Good morning. I have tested positive for the coronavirus. That means I will have to stay home for at least 2 weeks." "Okay, I really hope you feel better," Ava replied. Shortly thereafter, the mom stopped sharing the location of her phone with her daughter. Over the next 3 days, friends and family members received several text messages describing Gretchen's deteriorating condition. What was strange was that no one could reach the 51-year-old woman. She didn't even call her beloved young daughter, which was very unlike a loving mom. Those close to her began to suspect a scenario far worse than even an acute case of COVID-19. Someone else was sending messages from Gretchen's phone to cover up her disappearance. The police got involved, and soon it became clear to investigators looking for Gretchen that someone was indeed using the pandemic to cover up the woman's disappearance. Gretchen was born on January 8, 1969, in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. She spent most of her life up north, attending fashion school in New York City before moving to New Jersey, where she eventually became a teacher. In 2006, the blue-eyed blonde moved to Jupiter, the northernmost city in Palm Beach County, Florida. After working in the county's private schools for 8 years, Gretchen decided to try something new and took a job in the Human Resources Department of Viking Utility, an electrical contractor. The position allowed her to interact with new people, which Gretchen enjoyed. She considered the workforce her second family. Her first marriage didn't work out, but the former spouses remained on good terms and continued to raise their beloved daughter with shared custody. Gretchen led an active lifestyle and spent a lot of time in sports. It was through sports that she met David Anthony. Charismatic, able to charm, David, who was 7 years younger than Gretchen, first became her personal trainer and then her second husband. Women from all over the county came to see the young, muscular trainer. David was a star in the gym and was very popular, attracting many new students. Gretchen fell in love. The romance developed rapidly. After a brief engagement, the couple got married at the Eldest Chapel in Las Vegas. So in 2015, Gretchen Stoughton Crane became Gretchen Stoughton Anthony and found, in her opinion, the husband of her dreams. Gretchen's daughter adored her stepfather and even called him Bonus Dad. In total, the couple lived in marriage for 5 years. However, the relationship that began with magic and perfect happiness gradually turned into a woman's fear for her safety. When tragedy struck, police and later journalists began to inquire about the identity of the second spouse. They were in for a lot of surprises. As it turned out, David Ethan Anthony was originally known as David Anthony Deutsch, and then later changed his name. David Anthony Deutsch, a star college basketball player, was arrested in 1997 for robbing a Blockbuster video store with a water pistol and assaulting a police officer. In each case, he took a plea bargain and spent some time in jail. Growing up without a father in Palm Beach Gardens, David spent much of his childhood and adolescence alone. He didn't talk much, was withdrawn, had low self-esteem, and was bullied at school for being overweight. He wasn't even allowed to join a recreational sports league because he was so much larger than all the other kids. Not surprisingly, as a teenager, David struggled with severe depression and developed symptoms that his family believed were consistent with bipolar disorder. However, he refused to take any medication, devoted himself fanatically to sports, and really excelled at it. After high school, David received a scholarship to play college basketball and became a star on the team. He idolized basketball greats and even named his husky Kobe after his favorite basketball player, Kobe Bryant. On January 26, 2020, the idol will die in a helicopter crash, and this event will be another reason for David's unstable behavior. In the meantime, the smart, attractive coach ignores mental problems, bathes in deserved popularity, and becomes the husband of Gretchen. The couple lead an active lifestyle. David enjoys bicycling, deep-sea fishing, and kayaking. Gretchen works out hard at the gym, goes to the beach, kayaks, and does yoga. Unfortunately, only the first 2 years of marriage will prove to be happy. The remaining 3 years, the smiling blonde will spend trying to leave. Gretchen admitted to friends that her husband's behavior was becoming more and more manic, and at times he insulted her. They once even broke up for at least 6 months but got back together. Tabitha Hopkins, David's former boss at the gym, later recalled noticing strange mood swings in David. In 2017, things got so bad that Tabitha was forced to fire him for his aggressive behavior, especially towards women. David was indeed behaving very strangely and was unwilling to seek help. The man became obsessed with the end of the world and loaded 3 large bags of rice, several pots, pans, and 10 pairs of shoes into his truck in 2018. His family believed this episode was a symptom of bipolar and manic depressive disorder. Bad periods were followed by good ones in which David tried to do something about his behavior. He even managed to get Tabitha Hopkins to give him his job back by assuring the gym owner that he was trying to be a better person and attending self-improvement seminars. Tabitha softened. There was no denying David's effectiveness as a trainer. The clients were delighted with him. Over time, as the mental illness continued untreated, David's condition worsened. Gretchen recognized that her husband had problems and shared this with friends. Sometimes, she said, she would lock herself in their bedroom just to increase the distance between them. "I noticed this crazy look in his eyes," she texted a friend, Dawn, one morning in late December. David was gaining momentum, and the spouse didn't know what he was capable of. "I'm watching him on the cameras and waiting for him to go to bed," Gretchen wrote another evening. "Then I'll go downstairs, get a knife, and put it under my pillow, just in case, and hopefully sleep." That same year, on Christmas Eve, Gretchen couldn't find her personal belongings. She searched the house, looked in David's backpack, and found her wedding ring, passport, driver's license, credit cards, and some money. The incident so disturbed Gretchen that she texted Don, her boss and friend, that she was afraid of her own husband. By the end of the month, Gretchen made the decision to end the tumultuous relationship. In December 2019, she forced David to move out of the townhouse to her mother's house, who lived nearby, and changed the locks. It was during this time that David's colleagues noticed a gradual change in his behavior. Most of the time, the trainer was one of the first to arrive at the gym, but after the events in the family, he began to come later and later, seemed more and more withdrawn and sullen. On January 26th, Kobe Bryant, David's idol, dies. When Kobe Bryant passed away, something happened, Tabitha recalls. "You'd think David and Kobe Bryant were best friends. He was traumatized by it." In the days that followed, David was hysterical, crying and wailing in front of the fitness club groups he led and refusing to go home. Despite his emotionally fragile state, David took an active role in a controversial self-improvement program called Gratitude Training, which critics likened to a cult. He spent thousands of dollars on seminars, but refused to tell his family what he was doing during the sessions. David's behavior regressed. On February 24th, he failed to show up for work. When Tabitha tried to find out if he was okay, he attacked her, and the supervisor made the decision to terminate the employee permanently. This time, Tabitha caught a glimpse of David's frightening rage and was truly frightened. Hopkins texted Gretchen about the incident and asked her to be careful. "That's the last time I talked to Gretchen," she would later say. 4 days later, on February 28th, 2020, just weeks before her disappearance, Gretchen files for divorce. David's stability is rapidly going downhill, and he is becoming increasingly hostile. On March 7th, the woman David had begun dating booked a seat at an unusual art class. They were to drink wine and draw pictures under the guidance of the instructor. However, the evening did not go according to plan. When David wished to hug his companion during the class and she rejected the attempt, he jumped up, yelled at her in the middle of the class, and ran outside. David's behavior frightened the young woman, and she decided not to continue the interaction, telling him that he could not stay with her tonight. When they got to the house where David had left his truck, it became clear that David had different ideas about the matter. David, whom she'd only known for a month, had decided to move in with her. Duffel bags filled with men's clothes were spread out on her bed and dining room table, and food from his mother's house was stashed in the freezer. Kobe, David's husky, was running around in the backyard. David left only after a new friend called her neighborhood security company. When Gretchen went missing, her family told investigators that David was returning to her home after he left. The young woman was concerned for her safety and installed surveillance cameras throughout the house and garage. On March 11th, the World Health Organization declared a pandemic. A few days later, David, believing the pandemic to be an end-of-the-world prophecy, showed up at Gretchen's house in the early morning hours. He believed the world was coming to an end and walked around the windows trying to convince his almost ex-wife to go with him to Costa Rica, where he thought they could escape the virus. After a few hours, Gretchen relented and allowed David into the house. That evening, a patrolling police officer noticed David, visibly nervous and sweaty, strutting around outside a Riviera Beach restaurant and at one point approaching a group of teenage girls. The officer noticed David's license plate, partially covered with black duct tape, and headed toward him. David claimed that his 12-year-old stepdaughter had taped the license plate and began to act even more nervous. The man ignored the police officer's orders not to move, yanked open the door of his truck, and began searching for something under the seat. Fearing what would happen next, the officer pointed a gun at David and ordered him to the ground. When the officers looked under the driver's seat where David was trying to reach, they found a large knife. David was arrested for resisting arrest, but posted bail a few days later and was released. The pandemic was gaining momentum. In the early 20s of March, some states began banning people from leaving their homes. Gretchen, like everyone else, was trying to figure out how to live in the new realities. She shared informational videos about the virus and how to stay safe,
posting memes and jokes mocking the absurdity of the new normal.
On Thursday, March 19th, she posted a quote from a meditation blog. "When there is chaos around you, the wisest choice is to create peace within yourself." After that, her profile was no longer active, and she stopped answering calls and messages. This moment divided life into before and after for all of her near and dear ones. Texting from Gretchen Anthony's phone to friends and family began on March 23, 2020. Over the course of several days, friends and family received a series of messages from Gretchen stating that she was quarantined at home, then describing her deteriorating condition and hospitalization in the emergency room at Jupiter Medical Center. Another message claimed she was transferred to another CDC facility that did not exist. On March 24th, Don Paris, Gretchen's supervisor and friend, received a message from her saying, "I tested positive for coronavirus early this morning. This is bad news, but I am at a coronavirus CDC treatment center that only handles COVID cases. The good news is that my blood type can potentially be used in treatment. I'm not sure if you remember when I said I have a strain of mad cow disease in my blood. Well, that strain is important for gathering more answers and finding a cure. For safety reasons, Dr. Sinclair and her team strongly encourage program participants to keep contact only with immediate family members. I chose my mom. Gretchen's ex-husband, who had his 12-year-old stepdaughter visiting, also began receiving messages from Gretchen saying that the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, had quarantined her. She could be placed in a medically induced coma, and she would no longer be able to write. Jeff Dreyer didn't believe these reports. He was confused by the multiple text errors and abbreviations. The manner of speech in the messages sounded more like David Anthony, and Jeff became alarmed. In addition, it bothered everyone who received these messages that no one, not even his daughter Gretchen, never called. Friends couldn't imagine Gretchen dying of anything, since at 51 she was in good shape and took her health very seriously. When calls to the medical center confirmed that Gretchen Anthony had not been admitted there, the family along with friends decided to contact the police to check if their loved one was doing well. Gretchen Anthony's boss told police that she was last at work on March 20th, and when he called her insurance company to see if she was receiving medical care anywhere, they said there had been no referrals under her policy to process treatment. Jupiter Police Detective Jared Kennerson contacted Jupiter Medical Center and found that the hospital's records did not mention anything about such a patient. In fact, police found that Gretchen had not been to Jupiter Medical Center since 2008. Police checked the medical center parking lot and found a Mini Cooper in the parking lot. In the car, Gretchen's purse was lying in the most visible spot, causing patrol officers to become concerned. Officers went to the missing person's home. What they discovered at Gretchen's home was alarming and turned a simple visit into a potential murder investigation. A neighbor approached the officers and gave them the disturbing information. Early Saturday morning on Saturday, March 21st, I heard a very desperate female screaming as if she was being attacked. And then I heard her scream, "No!" And then I heard something like, "It hurts, stop." The scream was really serious. Unfortunately, Gretchen didn't call emergency services. Some people are just wary of calling the police. Officers became even more concerned when another neighbor told them he later noticed a soapy substance leaking from under Gretchen's garage door. The front door leading to the garage was locked, and the key was broken in the deadbolt. When officers were able to open the door, they detected a strong, pungent odor of cleaning product in the garage.
Using body cameras, patrol officers searched the house several times. They found evidence of a violent struggle, a broken picture frame, shards of glass on Gretchen's bed, and a soiled towel. Officers noticed that surveillance cameras inside the house had been removed from the walls, possibly to destroy compromising evidence, and sent a request to a service provider to recover the footage from the cloud. Police officials made inquiries and discovered that a neighbor had taken a photo of a black Nissan pickup truck parked outside Gretchen's home after the terrifying screams. The exact same pickup truck was owned by Gretchen's almost ex-husband, David Anthony, who suddenly decided to leave. His mother told police that her son packed up his truck and hit the road on Tuesday, March 24, 2020, saying he was going to Costa Rica. Their suspicions were heightened when they saw on video taken in the parking lot of Jupiter Medical Center, where Gretchen's car was found, a Mini Cooper pull into a parking space, and a tall figure, the height of David Anthony, emerge from the vehicle. Investigators began tracking Gretchen's cell phone and found that it was registered in the Pensacola, Florida area. As would later be confirmed, David had driven just 600 miles to Pensacola, Florida's westernmost city. After stopping at a couple of local pawn shops to sell some women's jewelry, he and his dog, Kobe, continued west, stopping for one night at a hotel in Pecos, Texas, before settling in Las Cruces, New Mexico. While 2,000 miles away, David contacted detectives and reported that Gretchen was alive and in no danger. He explained that his spouse had provided him with a written statement, which he read aloud over the phone. According to the statement, Gretchen discovered financial crimes at her job and fled Florida with David, fearing for her life. The statement also said she also fled from her first ex-husband, Jeff. Detectives didn't believe it and continued to investigate. They tracked Gretchen and David's cell phone signals, which indicated that the two phones were together. Expecting the worst, detectives obtained a warrant to impound the truck on March 29th and enlisted the help of Las Cruces police to arrange a traffic stop. Las Cruces police detained David, seized the truck and property, including his phone and Gretchen's phone, but they still didn't have enough evidence to call him in for questioning. He was allowed to just walk away. On March 30th, 2020, Jupiter police obtained electronic records from Gretchen's home, and investigators finally learned the truth. On the morning of March 21st, David lurked silently on the porch overlooking the back of the garage. In his hands, he held an elongated object. 6 minutes later, Gretchen appeared in the footage. The video shows David forcibly driving her into the garage, and a scream can be heard over the footage. First, Gretchen yelled to the Amazon Alexa device in the garage, "Alexa, turn on the lights in the garage." The surveillance camera audio then captured a muffled thud and Gretchen's muffled screams. She then yelled to Alexa again, "Alexa, call 911. Gretchen didn't know that unless she specifically programmed her smart speaker to call 911, the device wouldn't call the police in an emergency. After a while, David's face appeared in the frame, his hands wearing gloves. In one shot, Gretchen's bloody head could be seen as he walked around the garage. Investigators have seen enough. On March 30th, detectives get a warrant for David's arrest. Gretchen's case went from being a missing persons case to a murder investigation. Detective Kennerson rushed to Las Cruces. Shortly before midnight, March 31st, police arrested David outside a convenience store. Jupiter detectives questioned him at the state police headquarters in Las Cruces, New Mexico. They had one goal, to get David to reveal the whereabouts of Gretchen's body. And the detectives failed. David claimed that Gretchen was alive. In fact, during the interrogation, David Anthony made this claim 35 times. Detectives even tried using a voice recording of Gretchen's daughter, whom David really loved. With her father's permission, the girl recorded her request. "David, it's Ava. I love you. I'm scared. I miss my mom," she told him. "I need to know where my mom is. Please do the right thing and tell me where my mom is. Please. I love you." Detectives played the tape to David, but he remained indifferent. While behind bars, he refused to say anything about what had happened to Gretchen. In his typical restraint, he remained silent for months. David knew it would be difficult for the prosecutor to get a conviction without Gretchen's body. He was charged with second-degree murder and extradited to Florida. While David was in custody in Palm Beach County, Florida,
a grand jury indicted him for kidnapping and upgraded the murder charge from second-degree to first-degree murder. This was a turning point, and in December 2020, after 8 months in prison, the criminal took a plea deal with the prosecutor. The fact is that he could have faced the death penalty for first-degree murder. Under the terms of the deal, David would plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a 38-year prison sentence. The main condition of the deal was that he would lead investigators to Gretchen's body. On December 21st, 9 months after Gretchen Anthony disappeared, David Anthony admitted what everyone already knew. He killed his wife. Gretchen's body was found wrapped in a blanket 3 miles from her home, in the woods behind a Walmart store and near a nursing home.
Investigators determined she died from stab wounds to her neck and torso. There were several defensive wounds. She was fighting for her life. At the sentencing hearing, David Anthony said the COVID-19 pandemic was a contributing factor to his crime because he saw the pandemic as Armageddon from which he had to flee. My delusions saw the COVID pandemic as a prophecy of the end of the world, an Armageddon that I felt compelled to avoid at all costs. Under the terms of the plea agreement, David Anthony was sentenced to 38 years in prison on January 14, 2021. He is currently serving his sentence at the Martin Correctional Institution in Florida.
The case of Kelsey Turner, how a Playboy model and single mother became a convicted criminal. Boundless greed, selfishness, and the pursuit of easy wealth often drive people to commit horrific acts and crimes. The story of Kelsey Turner, a former American model who appeared in popular men's magazines like Maxim and Playboy, serves as a stark example of this. The crime she committed with several accomplices shocked the public with its brutality, ruthlessness, and lack of logic. The young woman, who aspired to a life of beauty, carefree ease, and affluence, not only lost everything she had, but also ended up behind bars. In Turner's case, the most tragic aspect is that the victim of the bloody act orchestrated by the blonde was a well-known and respected psychiatrist, Dr. Thomas Burchard, renowned for his successful long-term practice and numerous scholarly works. He was also known for his boundless generosity. The doctor was involved in charity work, helping sick children and single mothers. His good deeds ultimately cost him his life. All the participants in these events stood trial and are now serving their sentences in correctional facilities. Let's go back a few years to understand how and why the elderly doctor, who dedicated his life to helping others, met his end. The downfall of Kelsey Turner, a model and single mother. Kelsey Nicole Turner, née Ingram, was born on March 5, 1993, in the port city of Norfolk, Virginia. She was the second child of Samantha Ingram, a would-be model and dancer, and Christopher Ingram, a simple laborer. Kelsey grew up alongside her older brother, Colin. Shortly after Kelsey's birth, the family moved to the small industrial town of Jonesboro, Arkansas, where she spent most of her childhood. A few years later, her parents divorced. Her father returned to Virginia and largely lost contact with his former wife and their children. Kelsey grew into a striking beauty with a perfect figure and model looks. School didn't interest her much. She was more into parties with friends, dating, and attending various events. She dreamed of fame, gracing magazine covers, giving interviews, and walking red carpets. However, Kelsey lacked any real talent. Her youth and good looks were her only assets. In high school, she began attending castings, hoping to become a model. Her mother, Samantha, who once aspired to be a model herself, enthusiastically supported her daughter's endeavors. Kelsey managed only a couple of shoots for clothing catalogs. At 18, Kelsey married Jerry Turner. She was already pregnant at their wedding and soon gave birth to a daughter, Beverly. Despite the arrival of their child, the marriage was short-lived, ending in divorce. By the age of 20, having given up on runway modeling, Kelsey decided to pursue a career as a men's magazine model. She created a portfolio with provocative photos and sent them to various publications, soon catching the attention of several men's magazines. Kelsey saw this as the beginning of a dazzling career and her ticket to the glamorous, carefree life she had always dreamed of. For a few years, she regularly received shooting offers. She eagerly gave interviews, attended events, and tried to make valuable connections. However, her career highlights were one-off shoots for Playboy and Maxim and a photo session, an interview for 110 magazine. She traveled to Los Angeles and Las Vegas for these opportunities. In an interview, Kelsey candidly described herself saying, "I'm a blonde with a busty figure and a slim waist. What more do you need for happiness?" She added that she loved partying, spending time with friends, and living it up because life is short, and it should be lived beautifully and joyfully. Kelsey wasn't overly concerned about the future, frequently changed lovers, and quickly spent any money she earned or received from admirers. At 23, Kelsey became pregnant again and gave birth to a son, Josh. The child's father didn't want to marry her or acknowledge his offspring. As modeling offers dwindled, Kelsey turned to social media to build an audience. She actively managed her accounts, posting revealing photos in swimsuits, lingerie, or barely covering her intimate areas. To be fair, these images were heavily edited, making her resemble a Barbie doll. She also loved to share shots taken in fashionable boutiques, popular nightclubs, and other glamorous spots and entertainment venues. Kelsey's social media profiles created an illusion of a wealthy, successful, and carefree life. It seemed the beauty had everything and was simply enjoying life to the fullest. In reality, the single mother of 2 small children was struggling to make ends meet, but never learned to manage her finances wisely, spending any money she received on the very day she got it. Around 2016, Kelsey faced serious issues after an unfortunate incident involving her daughter. The girl was physically unharmed, but severely traumatized and became withdrawn and mute. Therapy was recommended, along with sessions with renowned child psychiatrist Dr. Thomas Burchard, who practiced in Monterey, California. This fateful encounter led years later to a terrible tragedy. Who was Dr. Thomas Burchard? Dr. Thomas Kirk Burchard was born on February 16, 1948, in Boston, Massachusetts, to a family of a well-known architect and engineer. Later, his family moved to Virginia, where his father taught architecture at Harvard and the Architectural College at the Technological Institute. This is where the future psychiatrist spent his childhood and youth. Choosing not to follow in his father's footsteps, the young Thomas decided to pursue a career in medicine, specifically specializing in child psychology. After graduating from medical school and defending his thesis, he worked as a pediatric psychiatry resident in various renowned hospitals and lectured at colleges across the country. Eventually, Dr. Burchard was employed at a public clinical hospital on the Monterey Peninsula in California, where he worked for over 40 years as an incredibly sought-after pediatric psychiatrist. Dr. Burchard had an impeccable reputation. He easily connected with his young patients and took on even the most challenging and severe cases. He earned his doctorate from the University of California, Berkeley. According to Google Scholar, he had over 300 scientific publications, which were cited almost 40,000 times in total, and his Hirsch Index, a scientific productivity metric, was 81. Moreover, Dr. Thomas was known for being kind, responsive, and incredibly generous. His compassionate nature drove him to help those in need, particularly focusing on his young patients whose parents couldn't afford sessions. He also paid for hospital treatments for sick children from low-income families and assisted single mothers. Dr. Burchard lived for a long time with a woman named Judy Earp, who is variously described as his assistant and housekeeper, or as his lover and even fiancée. Regardless, she knew him better than anyone else, and was the first to notice certain peculiarities in his behavior indicative of early signs of dementia or Alzheimer's disease. The elderly doctor, approaching his 70th birthday, became forgetful, absent-minded, and inattentive. He meticulously tried to hide this from his colleagues, constantly keeping diaries and notebooks where he recorded every detail, especially names, dates, and events, to avoid confusion. He always carried one of these notebooks in his breast pocket, containing his banking details, account numbers, passwords, and card pins. Another notable aspect of Burchard's behavior was that he, already a generous person, became very trusting, and the financial assistance he provided to those in need increased from hundreds to thousands of dollars. Dr. Thomas Burchard, a windfall for Kelsey Turner. When Kelsey first brought her daughter to Dr. Burchard's office, she lamented that she was raising 2 children alone and likely couldn't afford his costly services. To her surprise, the doctor offered to help her child for free, and after the appointment, gave the struggling single mother $300 for her children's needs. The blonde was astonished, but quickly realized that with tearful stories about her challenging life, she could extract more funds from the elderly man. At the next session, Kelsey, having prepared in advance, put on a whole performance, tearfully telling Dr. Burchard about her younger son's illness and lack of funds for expensive medications. This time, she boldly stated a fabricated amount and received it in full. Kelsey couldn't believe her luck. From then on, she regularly concocted tearful stories, extracting increasingly large sums of money from the trusting older man. Naturally, she spent the money not on her children, but on her own entertainment, designer clothes, as well as visits to cosmetologists and plastic surgeons. Unwilling to return to her native Virginia, Kelsey asked Thomas to pay for her rental housing in California, arguing it would be easier to find a job there, and the local climate was better for her children. It didn't take much to persuade the doctor, who simply paid the necessary amount for the apartment Kelsey liked. There were rumors that the odd pair were intimately involved, and this was why the elderly, respected doctor indulged every whim of the striking young blonde. While these rumors might have some basis, the men's magazine model claimed that Thomas had purely paternal feelings towards her and her children and helped selflessly. This was also echoed in court by Judy Earp, albeit with the caveat that Turner shamelessly exploited the doctor's kindness and his progressing dementia. It's worth noting that in addition to paying for rental housing, bills, and simply handing out large sums of cash for necessities, Thomas also rented a car for the young woman. However, it wasn't a practical family minivan suitable for safely transporting children, but a luxurious Mercedes-Benz convertible. Eventually, Kelsey realized that her modeling career was behind her, her youth was fading, and offers for shoots had ceased entirely. Yet, she didn't consider burdening herself with any other job, living instead on the largesse of her elderly benefactor. Attempts to break free, blackmail, and threats. Over nearly 3 years of this peculiar relationship, Dr. Burchard spent around $500,000 on the blonde and her children. However, Kelsey squandered all the money, undergoing breast augmentation and liposuction in hopes of reigniting her modeling career. She indulged in endless luxuries, while her children were largely neglected amid her non-stop partying. This led to Kelsey's ex-husband successfully gaining sole custody of their daughter through the court, stripping Kelsey of her parental rights. This left her with only her younger son, whose father, as mentioned earlier, had never shown any interest in his child. When Thomas learned about this development, he was furious, not with the girl's ex-husband, but with Kelsey herself. He realized that she was a negligent mother who did not bother to care for her children and spent all the money meant for them on her own needs, entertainment, and outfits. Dr. Burchard decided to have a serious talk with Kelsey, informing her that he would no longer sponsor her lavish and idle lifestyle. In response, Kelsey threatened to spread rumors that the respected child psychiatrist harbored inappropriate intimate interests in his young patients. Of course, this was a falsehood, but any gossip on the matter could severely damage the reputation of the esteemed doctor and academic. Reluctantly, Burchard agreed to Kelsey's terms and continued to transfer money and pay her bills. In early 2019, Kelsey decided to move to Las Vegas with her son to try and revive her modeling career. Naturally, she expected Thomas, whom she continued to blackmail, to finance this venture. The doctor rented a house Kelsey had chosen and transferred the amount of money she requested. After this, Kelsey disappeared for 2 months, giving no sign of her whereabouts. The fateful trip. In late February 2019, Kelsey Turner resurfaced as she was running out of money. She called Thomas, sobbing, and began to tell him about her severe illness, inability to work, and struggled to provide for her son. However, when the doctor refused to help, Kelsey's tone changed abruptly, and she started threatening and blackmailing him again. It's important to note that Judy Earp had long been urging Dr. Burchard to report Kelsey to the police, revealing her blackmail and extortion. Judy also suggested involving Child Protective Services, given that Kelsey, already stripped of her parental rights over her older daughter, was incapable of adequately caring for her young son. In case the matter went to court, Dr. Burchard secured support from his colleagues, who were informed about the situation and promised to back him up. Earlier, Judy even tried to talk to Kelsey herself, hoping to persuade her to leave Thomas alone, but was only met with threats of retaliation. This time, Dr. Burchard decided to go to Las Vegas himself to verify Kelsey's claims, though he already knew the answer. Judy tried to dissuade him from the trip, but the elderly man was adamant. She then urged him to take her or one of his friends along. However, Thomas insisted that it was his personal problem and that he needed to resolve it himself. He embarked on his journey on March 1st, 2019. A body in the trunk amidst the desert. On the morning of March 7th, a group of tourists traveling through Nevada deviated from the main highway onto a dirt road leading to Lake Mead. En route, they spotted a solitary Mercedes-Benz convertible parked in the middle of the desert with its windows up and roof closed. The absence of anyone nearby seemed odd and suspicious. Driven by curiosity, the travelers approached and noticed one of the car windows was shattered. Peering inside, they discovered signs of a struggle, with bloodstains throughout the interior. The tourists immediately reported their grim discovery to the police. Law enforcement officers arrived at the scene around noon, under the scorching sun, and were instantly hit by an unbearable stench of decay. The source was quickly identified when the police opened the trunk. Beneath a pile of items and rags lay the lifeless body of an elderly man, next to him a blood-stained baseball bat. You may have guessed that the body belonged to Dr. Burchard, who had been missing for 5 days by that point. Judy had reported his disappearance on March 2nd when she couldn't reach Thomas at their scheduled time. She instantly feared something terrible had happened and promptly contacted the police, hoping he would be found alive. Unfortunately, that was not the case. The autopsy revealed numerous injuries on the elderly man's body, including abrasions, bruises, and superficial cuts. He had sustained several severe head injuries, likely inflicted with the baseball bat found beside him in the trunk. Part of his ear had been severed, and his hands bore numerous cuts indicating a desperate attempt at defense. Also notable were bruises on his face with a peculiar imprinted pattern. Most horrifyingly, it seemed the man had been placed in the trunk while wounded but still alive, and had slowly suffocated under the intense desert sun. Main suspects and crime scene investigation. Since the car found at the scene was rented in Kelsey Turner's name, she immediately became the primary suspect. Judy provided the police with the address where the blonde lived and where the deceased doctor had headed, as the house was rented in his name. However, upon arrival, the police found no one there. Inside, containers of cleaning agents were scattered everywhere, and the air was still thick with the scent of household chemicals. It was clear that a hasty cleanup had been attempted to erase any evidence of the crime. The house was occupied by Turner, her 4-year-old son, and her new boyfriend, John Logan Kennison, along with 2 neighbors, Diana Pina and Jeremy Escherich. All had fled, making them suspects, as the petite blonde couldn't have inflicted such injuries on the doctor or placed his body in the car trunk by herself. The only person police managed to interview was Jeremy. He and his girlfriend, who had been visiting him, left the house while the doctor was still alive and unharmed. Jeremy recounted that his girlfriend had drunk too much and flirted with the doctor, attempting to get a couple of $100, mimicking Kelsey's tactics. Kelsey became enraged, accusing the woman of trying to steal Thomas from her. The 2 women almost fought, and Jeremy had to quickly take his girlfriend away from the house. He hadn't returned for several days and was unaware of the subsequent events. Police also learned from Judy that Dr. Burchard always carried a notebook with bank account details and passwords, which he often forgot. This notebook was missing, and large sums of money were withdrawn from 2 of his accounts on March 3rd. The accounts and cards were immediately blocked, and on March 21st, in Stockton, California, Kelsey and her boyfriend John were arrested after another attempt to withdraw money. For nearly 3 weeks, the couple, along with their child, had been hiding in motels, moving from place to place and paying in cash. They regretted not completely emptying Burchard's accounts initially and decided to do so later, planning to flee to Mexico with the money. However, by the time they tried again, the accounts were blocked, and the police arrived promptly. Reconstructing the timeline of events. While Kelsey and John adamantly denied any wrongdoing, a third participant in the events, Diana voluntarily surrendered to the police and narrated what transpired on the night of March 2nd. According to her, after Jeremy and his girlfriend left, Turner had a severe altercation with Dr. Burchard, angered by his declaration that he would not give her another cent. She threatened to tarnish his reputation by spreading rumors about the psychiatrist's inappropriate behavior with his young patients. As Kelsey became physically aggressive, the elderly man locked himself in a room. John, with a forceful shoulder thrust, broke down the door and severely struck the older man with a bat, causing a massive hematoma and a nosebleed. Diana rushed in, pleading for everyone to calm down. Seeing Thomas's condition, she urged them to take him to the hospital, fearing the consequences of their actions. After extracting a promise from the doctor that he would tell the police he was attacked and robbed by strangers, all four drove to the garage. Burchard was seated in the back of the car. Kelsey then instructed Diana to return to the house and clean up thoroughly, erasing all blood traces. Diana obediently started the cleanup, but soon heard Dr. Burchard's cries and the sounds of a struggle. Rushing back to the garage, she saw the couple brutally assaulting the elderly man, trapped between them in the car, unable to escape or defend himself. It turned out that Kelsey and Kennison never intended to take the man to the hospital. They planned to finish him off using the bat and a small knife, inflicting cuts. John also repeatedly hit the doctor in the face with the handle of his unloaded pistol, causing the peculiar patterned bruises. Diana was again ordered back to the house to continue cleaning. Fearing she might be next if she didn't comply, she left the garage. While she was still cleaning inside, she heard car engines and saw the couple's two vehicles leaving. A few hours later, only John's car returned, with Kelsey accompanying him. Diana remained unaware of the convertible's whereabouts until news reports surfaced about a car found in the desert with a body in the trunk. Trial and sentence. From the outset, Diana opted for a plea deal, agreeing to tell everything she knew. This helped her avoid charges of complicity, leading to a lighter sentence for evidence tampering, which resulted in only 3 years of imprisonment. The former lovers, on the other hand, stubbornly shifted the blame onto each other. However, proving their guilt was straightforward, as they left substantial evidence in the car, and their phones were traced to the desert on the night of March 2nd, at the location where they abandoned the car with the body. Kennison was found guilty of second-degree homicide and sentenced to 45 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 years. The situation with Turner was more complex. Shortly after her arrest, she declared her pregnancy, significantly delaying the trial. During her incarceration, she gave birth to a girl who, along with her son, was placed under the care of social services, as none of Turner's relatives were willing to assume such responsibility. In January 2023, following her attorney's advice, Kelsey admitted her guilt and was sentenced to 25 years in prison with the possibility of parole no earlier than after 10 years. She is currently serving her sentence at the Florence McClure Women's Correctional Center in Las Vegas. In conclusion, it's worth noting that in February 2023, ABC's documentary series 20/20 Inches aired an episode titled A Model Murder, detailing the heinous crime committed by Turner and her boyfriend against Dr. Burchard. The city of Welcome in the Free State Province is the youngest and most dynamically developing city in South Africa. It was founded in 1947, following the discovery of the largest gold deposit in the area the previous year. Its name translates from Afrikaans, one of the country's official languages, as greeting. Despite its welcoming name and its industry-forming gold mining, it gained widespread attention due to a grievous crime that occurred there in 2011. When the criminals were identified, the prosecution was baffled. This notorious case became the 10th in the history of international criminal activity. During the investigation, it was discovered that the case involved followers of Satanism and occultism. Michael Van Eck was born on August 14, 1987, in the young and developing city for gold miners. He became the only brother to 4 sisters, Natasha, Michelle, Bianca, and Hendriana. The boy grew up in a large and close-knit family. His parents were caring and loving people. To provide a decent life for their children, the head of the family worked hard and organized his own business. The mother created a favorable atmosphere in the home for the growth and development of the younger generation. Michael was sociable and kind, showed diligence in school and sports. He even earned a black belt in karate, which he was very proud of. This gave him confidence and resilience. After finishing school, the young man trained as an electrician. This in-demand profession opened the doors to good earnings and promising work. The young man worked in his field at mine number 4 of the Beatrix mine in the small town of Unison. He did not stop there and continued his education to become an engineer. In 2011, the 23-year-old hero of our story registered on the dating site. In this way, he wanted to distract himself from a breakup and make new acquaintances. It seemed that luck smiled at him one day. Among the numerous photos and profiles, a lonely young man took a fancy to the profile of a sweet and smiling girl. During the ensuing correspondence, the guy learned that their interests coincided. She, like him, disliked noisy parties and drunk companies and wanted to find true love and build a strong family. Michael was pleasantly surprised that he could find a suitable candidate on the internet. Since the young man still lived with his parents, he shared his joys and concerns with his mother. On April 2nd, the son boasted to her that he was going on a date, and he prepared thoroughly for it. To please the girl, he withdrew his first paycheck of 1,000 rand from his card. The only thing that troubled the young man was the unusual place his friend chose for their first meeting. It was the city cemetery. Apparently not to worry his parents, he kept quiet about it. Around 9 p.m. that same day, Michael said goodbye to his family and left the house. He headed to the designated place in the silver Peugeot 207, a gift from his parents for his coming of age. As tradition demanded, the girl was a little late, but her appearance was impressive. The stranger from the internet arrived in a pristine white dress and smiled. The conversation was relaxed, after which she suggested continuing the evening further and invited the young man to a distant part of the cemetery. There, a meadow awaited them with a spread blanket. On it lay a basket of fruits and wine. After the young people had a glass each, the beautiful companion kissed a stunned Michael. Suddenly, the pleasant feeling of the kiss turned to pain and horror. The unsuspecting young man became part of a sinister plan, since the innocent appearance of his pen pal did not match her inner world. Chama van Heerden was born in 1991 during a crisis period for her parents. When her mother found out she was pregnant, the couple decided to delay their divorce and give their relationship another chance. However, their attempts to reconcile and improve their life together were unsuccessful. The family environment only worsened. Her mother openly disliked the little girl, seeing her as a tie to her husband. After the divorce, she took the children and moved away from her former husband. However, the failed marriage was not the main reason for her coldness. She continued to lack love and attention towards her children, even after the relationship ended. All 3 children felt lonely and misunderstood, but Chana suffered the most. She grew up withdrawn and sullen. From an early age, she exhibited psychological issues. She talked about death and drew incomprehensible pictures. Eventually, the little girl developed an imaginary friend named Azazel. Concerned about their daughter's behavior, her grandparents thought she was possessed. Thus, they decided to take her to church, where she underwent an exorcism ritual. According to a witness, her body convulsed during the prayers. In reality, Chana was scared of crowds and clearly frightened by the ordeal. The shock could have triggered an epileptic seizure. The traumatic event deeply impacted the young girl's memory, causing her to develop a fear of the dark. Additionally, her mother once told her that toys come to life at night, which led the frightened daughter to tape her doll's eyes shut and tie their bodies with shoelaces. As she grew older, her mental condition worsened. At age 10, she nearly harmed a house guest with a knife while visiting her father. Only after this incident did they seek psychiatric help for Chana. Following a specialist's evaluation, she was prescribed sedatives. The medication had a positive effect on her mood and well-being. She became calmer and more friendly. During a remission period, her father spent more time with his daughter. He often picked her up from school and took her hunting with him. By sharing his hobby, he aimed to give her the attention she lacked. The unstable teenager enjoyed her father's activity. She later confessed that she found pleasure in butchering carcasses and skinning animals. This led her to bring home dead animals, starting with rats and birds and eventually progressing to cats and dogs. She enjoyed cutting flesh and occasionally inflicted injuries on herself. During an investigation, her sister revealed that at age 12, Chana befriended an older man who introduced her to forbidden substances and took advantage of her condition. Her sisters did not inform their parents, but Chana ended the destructive relationship. This experience undoubtedly had a negative impact on her troubled psyche. At age 15, her mother moved to New Zealand, where she met another man and stayed with him. Over time, she never returned for her children. They remained with their father and stepmother, who tried their best to provide for the children, though they did not fully understand the severity of the youngest daughter's issues. Her behavior was largely attributed to adolescence. The situation worsened a year later, when Chana became involved with a 22-year-old young man interested in Satanism, occultism, and voodoo cults. The boyfriend became a real mentor to the impressionable young woman, but he was cruel in character, often suppressing and demeaning her. Nonetheless, a supportive family environment and psychotherapy yielded positive results. By her 17th birthday, Chana's life began to improve. She broke off dangerous connections, graduated from high school, and enrolled in college where she studied art and graphic design. After Chana lost interest in Satanism and stopped using forbidden substances, her emotional state improved. She excelled in her studies and secured a job in her field. At her new job, Chana found support not only from her colleagues, but also from management. It turned out she had a real talent for visual arts, which brought her respect and recognition in her professional field. At the same time, she started dating a man named Warren. To outsiders, her life appeared completely normal. Her family and close friends did not discuss her past, hoping that the difficult times were behind her. However, what was happening in her soul was hard to say. Perhaps her inner demons were merely lying dormant. Her father was the happiest for Chana. He hoped that she had finally matured and would soon marry. However, his expectations were not met. The obstacle emerged from an unexpected source. Warren had a friend named Roy who considered himself highly sensitive. Despite Chana's sweet and friendly demeanor, he sensed something repellent and malevolent in her. Yet Roy's words were not taken seriously, as her outward appearance did not match his perceptions. One day, he pulled her aside and asked, "Who is Norman?" Each time he saw her, this name popped into the clairvoyant's mind. The young man thought she might not be faithful to his friend, so he decided to ask her directly. In response, Chana unexpectedly spat in his face and demanded he stop bothering her with foolish questions. It later became known that Norman was the second name of Azazel, her imaginary childhood friend. Following the incident, the dynamics between the young people changed. At one of the parties, Chana's attention shifted to a 24-year-old named Martins. Although the young man was generally calm and sociable, there were unpleasant rumors about him. Martins van der Merwe. Martins van der Merwe was born into a well-off and respected family. Unlike Chana, he had excellent relationships with both parents. As a child, he was smart and well-mannered, performing well academically. However, it turned out that since the age of 6, he had been suffering from a mental illness. Around that time, he began experiencing hallucinations. His parents recounted that according to their son, a certain entity appeared to him, convincing the boy that he was endowed with incredible strength. Martins believed this and felt special. Gradually, his mental condition worsened and his behavior changed. Due to problems at school and home, at the age of 14, van der Merwe was hospitalized in a psychiatric facility. There, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Unfortunately, conventional treatment did not help. Since the family was financially secure, his parents dedicated all their efforts to finding effective medications. Thanks to the efforts of both family and doctors, the necessary drugs were eventually found. With these, nearly all deviations were controlled, except for sporadic outbursts of aggression. Martins once witnessed a stray cat being mauled by dogs. It made a deep impression on him. Instead of feeling disgust or pity, he hid the animal's body and watched it. This led him to start torturing animals. He later dropped out of school and began helping his father in the carpentry shop. In the future, Martins dreamed of continuing the family tradition. While working, his condition improved. He no longer wanted to do bad things to animals and take their lives. For this reason, he stopped taking medication. Everyone was wary of his decision, but the young man insisted that the disease had receded and that he was in control. Unfortunately, this turned out to be an inevitable mistake: general insanity. His mental state gradually deteriorated. It was around this time that Martins met Chana. These unstable young people found each other and began dating. However, outwardly they looked happy, so their parents were happy with their relationship. Of course, neither of them admitted to the problems their children had faced in the past. In the end, their union led to horrifying consequences. At first, the couple was open to the outside world, socializing and attending parties. Acquaintances recalled that they sometimes noticed cuts on the hands of young people. They joked that they were engaged in intimate experiments. After that, they began to distance themselves from people. They became interested in Satanism, voodoo cults, and occult practices. They also became interested in infamous serial criminals. In February 2011, Martins posted a picture with Chana on one of his social media pages. The pair were hugging, and the caption under the photo read, "Killers," with an ambiguous emoji. At the time, no one took their post seriously. Eventually, the young man asked his girlfriend's father for a marriage license. Mr. Van Heerden was incredibly happy. No one could have imagined what terrible dreams the couple nurtured. Instead of dreaming of traveling and children, they wanted to end their lives. Gradually, their sick fantasies turned into a bloodthirsty plan. The crazy couple decided to torture the homeless to death, and they practiced on animals. However, their plan was never realized, as the criminals could not find a suitable victim. Their monstrous plan was waiting for the right moment. The encounter. It all began when Chana posted her profile on a dating site. Before long, a young man named Michael Van Eck responded. The attractive young man caught the interest of the nefarious couple, and Chana targeted him for their plans. From the very first messages, the young people started flirting. After a few days of communication, the girl suggested they meet. Michael had been looking forward to this, but he hadn't expected it to come so soon or directly from her. Unfortunately, the somewhat unusual location for their first date didn't raise any alarms for him. Apparently, he was so eager to meet the charming conversationalist from the internet in person that he agreed to the dubious proposal. Chana and Martins meticulously prepared to bring their wild dream to life. They thought through everything thoroughly: the attire, the means to end a life, and even the setting. Chana approached the date fully prepared. The trap. The long-awaited meeting went exactly as planned for both parties. The victim fell for the bait. An angelic appearance of the girl and a kiss lulled his alertness. This gesture was the agreed-upon signal for Martins. All this time, the man had been hiding behind the tombstones. He approached Michael from behind and struck him with a knife. Unexpectedly for everyone, the young man resisted. The attackers hadn't anticipated this. Noticing that their new acquaintance was putting up a desperate fight, Chana intervened. Altogether, they inflicted about 30 knife wounds on the unfortunate young man. Ultimately, completely weakened, Michael begged them to end his suffering. Pleased with their conquest, Martin slit his throat. After that, the unthinkable began. The perpetrators dragged the body onto the blanket and proceeded with their plan. The couple severed the young man's right and left legs at the knee and decapitated him. The severed parts were placed in bags. They then decided to hide the body at the site. However, they miscalculated one thing: they had no shovels. Thus, they had to dig the earth with their hands and knives. As a result, they could not make the grave deep enough. After burying the body halfway, the perpetrators left with their trophies. Along the way, they used the victim's vehicle. Martins initially took the wheel, but later handed control over to his companion. The surge of adrenaline prevented him from keeping his eyes on the road. Upon arriving home, they stored the bags with body parts in the refrigerator as if they were groceries. After Van der Merwe had somewhat recovered, he started Michael's car and drove it to a troubled neighborhood. The criminals hoped the car would be stolen, so he left it unlocked with the keys in the ignition. The victim. The next day, a cemetery worker noticed a fresh burial that wasn't there the day before. His dreadful suspicions were confirmed when he stumbled upon bloody traces and torn clothing in the bushes. He then called over his supervisor to examine the grave. What the unintended witnesses found would long remain etched in their memory. Beneath the soil lay a dismembered male body. The authorities were immediately notified of the grim discovery. At the same time, Michael's parents were beside themselves with worry. Since the previous evening, he hadn't responded to calls. Even if it was presumed that he had stayed overnight at his internet girlfriend's place, he should have made contact by now. Instead, Michael's workplace called his parents. The concerned management wanted to understand why he was absent from a crucial site. At the same time, the police received a report about a Peugeot 207 found abandoned in a parking lot. Passers-by were alarmed by the bloodstains on the trunk. After running the vehicle through their database, the owner was identified. Detectives also tracked that before its discovery, the car had been at the cemetery for a long time. The local precinct was already aware of an unidentified body found on its grounds. All signs were suspicious. Armed with this information, law enforcement officials went to the residence of Michael Van Eck. Upon arrival, the officers confirmed their suspicions. His parents had been searching for the young man since the previous day. They asked Michael's mother to come to the cemetery, where forensic specialists and search dogs were already at work, desperately trying to locate missing body parts. At the scene, the woman recognized belongings found, and she also identified her son's body by distinctive burn marks he had sustained in childhood. During the autopsy, the medical examination confirmed that the young man had suffered numerous knife wounds. Signs of his struggle were evident. It was also determined that the body had been dismembered post-mortem. At least the perpetrators had the mercy not to do this while he was still alive. Meanwhile, experts noted that the dismemberment was performed with professional precision, indicating that the perpetrators had significant experience in this area. There was no doubt that multiple attackers were involved. The number of wounds, their nature, and the strength required to subdue the victim clearly demonstrated this. Ultimately, DNA testing confirmed the identity of 23-year-old Michael Van Eck. Time to gather stones. During the investigation, police confiscated the victim's cell phone and computer. It was established that the last person the young man had communicated with was Chana Van Heerden. According to their messages, she was the one who invited him to the ominous date at the cemetery. Subsequently, detectives contacted the potential suspect and invited her to give a statement. The young woman did not refuse and arrived with her boyfriend, Martens van der Merwe. The couple was interviewed separately. During the questioning, they confessed to being involved in the group ending of a life. Upon learning of the incident, the girl's father rushed to the station. He couldn't believe what he was hearing and asked his daughter if she really was involved in the accusations against her. Chana calmly confirmed and added that she would willingly do it again. She claimed she had dreamt of this ever since she started hunting with him. The cruel confession of the seemingly sweet girl shocked not only her father but everyone present. Her boyfriend Martens also behaved defiantly. As the case gained public attention, he did not hide his pleasure from the public scrutiny and posed for the cameras. It was clear that none of the accused felt remorse for their actions. It turned out that after the crime, if caught, the mad couple planned to end their lives. But the young man changed his mind, and his partner followed suit. They wanted to live, the lair of monsters. During the search of the young couple's apartment, police felt uneasy, to say the least. The environment was horrifying. The walls were adorned with portraits of Chana, depicting her in various guises. In some, she was depicted without eyes, in others without a mouth or ears. All images of the girl were distorted. Additionally, the rooms contained ritual items, animal scalps, knives, and various objects of unclear purpose. Also found were belongings of the deceased young man, glasses, and a wallet. As Martens later confessed, they took Michael's money to buy necessary items for their next crime. However, the most horrifying discovery awaited in the refrigerator. From it, police retrieved Michael's head with the mouth sewn shut. It was assumed that the couple planned to use the young man's head as a ritual bowl later on. Eyes and ears of the victim were stored in separate containers. The victim's hand and leg were found buried near the murderer's home, alongside the bodies of various animals. The girl's diary contained horrific thoughts and their impending realization. From everything discovered during the inspection, it was clear that the couple planned not just one more crime. The process of ending lives and subsequent mutilation of bodies provided them with unimaginable pleasure. Martens and Chana underwent multiple evaluations for mental competence. Fortunately, the commission confirmed that the young individuals were aware of their actions and desired the inevitable consequences. Otherwise, they might have avoided punishment and received only mandatory treatment. Punishment. In November 2011, the trial concerning Chana took place, treating her as a serial offender. Despite this being a singular incident, she did not hide her desire to repeat her actions. She told the court that she understands she should feel shame or remorse, but for some reason, she does not. She can only grasp the gravity of her actions through societal standards and the reactions of others. Psychiatrists declared that the defendant suffers from psychopathic and antisocial disorders, apparently more dangerous than her boyfriend, but adept at concealing it. Throughout the sentencing, she remained impassive. Chana Van Heerden was found guilty and sentenced to 35 years in prison without the possibility of parole, 20 years for ending a life and an additional 15 for robbery and dismemberment. As for Martens van der Merwe, unlike his partner, he defended himself in court. He claimed not to remember the events that occurred until he found himself in jail and behaved arrogantly and aggressively. The defendant admitted to studying Satanism and occultism, trying to understand life and death. He said his relationship with Chana pushed them both towards committing the crime. During the trial, he apologized to the victim's parents, although his words sounded insincere. He implied that the victim was simply at the wrong place at the wrong time, although in reality, the mad couple had lured the unfortunate man into a premeditated trap. Michael's mother could not contain her distress and struck the accused during one of the sessions. Ultimately, Martens van der Merwe was also found guilty of the charges against him and sentenced to 35 years in prison, but with a chance for parole after serving half of his sentence. Life after. Until 2014, the lovers kept in touch behind bars. In his letters, Martens called Chana a dark goddess, writing, "Lady Blackmore, when you part your lips, words of a dead butterfly spell out. They fall upon my mystical heart and paint it with sweet poison, spreading beautiful darkness through my empty veins." Over time, Chana ended the relationship with her former lover, feeling that they had grown cold and distant from each other. It is known that in prison the woman behaves exemplarily, teaching her fellow inmates art and theology. Collectors fascinated by the lives of humanity's worst, maniacs, offenders, cannibals, have paid large sums for a photograph of the woman with her autograph, as well as a print of her hand. Remarkably, Martens also developed his own fan club. For a long time, police monitored his followers to prevent them from emulating his actions. The convicted man continued treatment and completed his education through correspondence courses. Thus, a good-natured young man became the victim of a terrible scheme by two mentally unstable individuals. Driven by their own desires, lacking restraining mechanisms and societal norms, the perpetrators decided they had the right to take another person's life. Yet what is also monstrous in this story is how many troubled individuals there are among us. Sometimes behind an innocent facade lies sheer hell. New acquaintances do not always positively affect our lives. Sometimes they can mark a point of no return.
In psychology, there is a special term called Adderley syndrome, which refers to the morbid obsession of one person with another. The affliction received its name in honor of the youngest daughter of the famous French writer, Adélie Hugo. She was a very attractive girl and a talented pianist, but unrequited love noticeably affected her mental state. As a result, the beauty simply poisoned the life of herself and her lover, who for years pursued, pretending to be his wife, then ruined his career and personal life. Unfortunately, 43 years of her 84 years, Adele spent in the walls of a psychiatric hospital. It is worth noting that the condition in which one person is overly interested in, or even obsessed with, another so much that he loses the ability to control his emotions, a fairly common phenomenon. In most cases, an experienced psychologist can help. Sometimes hospitalization and more thorough therapy are required, but sometimes such obsession borders on insanity, pushing a person to desperate, unpredictable, and extremely cruel actions. The case of Emma Youngstig in 2008 shook the whole of Europe and became one of the most brutal in the history of Swedish forensic science. The perpetrator could be recognized as insane, and because of the lack of hard evidence, the case and even wanted to close, but he showed his true face in the courtroom. An immature young family, Emma Youngstig was a native of Stockholm, where she was born on February 16, 1985, where almost all of her childhood and adolescence passed. She was brought up in a simple family where she was the younger of two daughters, and grew up with her older sister, Katharina. At the age of 19, the girl married a young man named Nicholas, with whom she began dating while still in high school. The chosen one was not much older than the girl, and at the time of marriage the bride was already expecting a child. In 20 years, Emma first became a mother, giving birth to a son who was named Max, and a year and a half later she gave birth to a second child, a daughter, Saga. But, despite the appearance of two common heirs, the couple were still too young and were not ready for family life and the hardships of everyday life. They constantly quarreled over trifles, could not find a common language, and soon after the birth of their daughter, decided that they should separate. But then, the question of custody of children, which was solved very hard and painful. Nicholas sought not only to help the children financially, but also to take a direct part in their lives and upbringing. Emma was not against it, but soon she had a new romantic relationship. She moved to a small town called Arboga, located about 150 kilometers from Stockholm, to her new lover, and took the children with her. The ex-husband was against it because he wanted to be able to see his daughter and son every day. Ex-spouses repeatedly met in court to settle the matter, and Nicholas even threatened Emma, which she immediately reported to the police. Problems could not be solved peacefully in any way, and each of the parents began to seek sole custody. New love. Emma met a guy named Torgny Hellberg through the internet. They quickly found a common language, got close, and a romantic relationship began between them. The young man was not confused by the fact that the 23-year-old girl already has two heirs from a previous marriage, because he had long dreamed of a family and was ready to accept them as his own children. The newly married couple first lived in a small house, which was inherited by Torgny by inheritance. But when the lovers decided to get married, they moved to a larger house, where they could live comfortably, and each of the children would have their own cozy room. The man at that time had a good job with a decent salary, and Emma was engaged in raising small children as well as creating a home, but, being a designer by education, was going to work in the future in the specialty. The couple planned to play a wedding in the summer of 2008, but these plans were not destined to fulfill. Brutal massacre. March 17, 2008 was an ordinary Monday. Torgny went to work early in the morning and Emma stayed home with 3-year-old Max and 1.5-year-old Saga. In the evening, the girl was preparing dinner, waiting for her fiancé to return, and at the same time, she was chatting online with her sister, Katarina, discussing a gift for their parents' upcoming wedding anniversary. At about 6:30 in the evening, Emma received a call from Torgny, warning her that he was late for work. He said they could start dinner without him. After the brief phone conversation, Emma continued with her household chores, fed the children, and then sat down at the computer again, continuing to text with her sister. At 07:07 p.m., their communication was abruptly interrupted, literally half a word. Katarina thought it was very strange, because she saw that her sister was typing a message to her, but for some reason never sent it. 5 minutes later, a worried Katarina called Emma, but she didn't pick up. Then she dialed Torgny's number to find out what had happened. The young man was on his way home from work and was just approaching the house, so he assured Katarina that everything was fine, that Emma was probably distracted by the kids, and that she would call her back as soon as she could. When the man arrived at the threshold, he was surprised to find that the front door was unlocked. When he went inside, he immediately noticed the mess, thinking that the children had made a mess while playing. But then he saw brown stains and stains on the floor, realizing with horror that it was blood. Hellberg called Emma and the children's names loudly several times, but no one responded. In the hallway on the floor, the man saw a strange object, thinking at first that it was a doll, because the figure was lying in a completely unnatural pose. As he got closer, however, he realized that it was Saga in a pool of her own blood. Her head and face were disfigured beyond recognition and turned into a bloody mess. A little farther away lay her brother in a similarly horrifying state, with a fractured skull. Their mother was also lying on the floor, covered in blood and in an unnatural posture. Her face was badly shattered and disfigured. It seemed that all of them were no longer showing signs of life, Shocked, Tony pulled out his cell phone with trembling hands and dialed the emergency number, reporting what had happened. At that moment, Emma shuddered and let out a loud, long groan. Police officers and paramedics immediately arrived on the scene and found a weak pulse in all 3 victims and quickly began resuscitation. The picture was horrifying. No one understood what kind of beast could do this to a young woman and her children. But saving their lives was the priority. So, first of all efforts were thrown at getting the victims of the attack to the nearest hospital for assistance. Fighting for lives and the beginning of the investigation. From the outset, the arriving paramedics expressed doubts about whether the victims could be brought to the hospital alive at all. However, all 3 were still alive when they arrived at the medical facility. All were diagnosed with open head injuries, with severe brain damage and extensive blood loss. No prognosis was given by the doctors, but only did the best they could. Max and Saga were in critical condition. Even if they had managed to save their lives, it was unlikely that they would have ever been able to even breathe on their own. The condition of their mother was assessed as very serious, but stable. The young woman was put into a medically induced coma and hooked up to life support machines, hoping her body could cope. While doctors were fighting for the lives of the victims, forensic experts were working at the scene, trying to find clues and reconstruct the picture of the crime. Inside the house, chaos reigned. Scattered belongings, blood on the floor and walls. Unfortunately, the medics left behind a lot of clutter, as well as moving certain items around to allow access to the victims. The floor where Emma, Max, and Saga were lying was literally trampled on, and now the medics had to figure out what footprints belonged to them and if the perpetrator's prints were there. Remarkably, the intruder had massacred the 3 victims at most in 13 minutes. Since the last message from Emma to her sister was sent at 07:07 p.m., and at 07:20 p.m. already received a call to the police from a frightened Torgny. That said, the brutality with which the perpetrator massacred them spoke of some personal motive and a deep dislike for the victims. The weapon of the crime was a blunt and heavy object, presumably a hammer, which the mysterious criminal used to bludgeon his victims with ferocity. However, nothing of the kind could not be found at the scene, from which the natural conclusion was that the perpetrator took it with him. First suspect. From the start, Helberg was the prime suspect. He was not married to Emma and was not the father of her children, and therefore it was suggested that perhaps a domestic quarrel between the couple could turn into a bloodbath. The grief-stricken man was immediately questioned, but he had an ironclad alibi. Firstly, he was really late at work, which was confirmed by his boss and colleagues, and secondly, at the time of the brutal massacre of his loved ones, he was walking down the street and was caught on a number of CCTV cameras. Nevertheless, Torney was decided to take a detailed statement, as he might have seen or heard something important that could help in the investigation of the crime. However, he could not remember anything specific, for it was business as usual until he saw the mess and the bodies lying on the floor. The only thing that alerted him was the unlocked front door, which could indicate that Emma had let the criminal in. After questioning, the man was released. By then, he had already informed his fiancée's family, and Emma's parents immediately rushed to Arboga from Stockholm. Together, they went by car straight to the hospital to the victims, but on the way there, they learned from the news on the radio terrible news. Max and Saga died of their injuries without regaining consciousness. Ex-husband's revenge? The new suspect was Emma's ex-husband and father of the children, Nicholas. The couple had been divorced for more than a year and parted peacefully. They did not manage. They constantly quarreled, sued for custody of the children, and the man even threatened the ex-spouse, which she reported to the police. It seemed that everything fits. After the breakup of the young woman took the children and took them to another city to his new chosen one, and their father, not having achieved custody through the court on the grounds of hostility to Emma, decided to take a desperate step and in a fit of rage and crucified the heirs. Nicholas was immediately tracked down and taken into custody. But the man seemed crushed by the news of Max and Saga's deaths, sobbing and constantly asking if there was some mistake. When he was charged with what had happened, he was at first stunned, and then began shouting that he would never hurt his children, whom he adored. When asked where Nicholas was at the time of the crime, he replied that he was away in another city, where he went on business for a day. It sounded strange, but soon his alibi was confirmed. The man was indeed 120 miles away from the crime scene when someone was massacring his ex-wife and children. Searching for clues and fearing for the life of the sole survivor, forensic investigators remained active at the scene, trying to find any clues, evidence, or traces of the attacker. But the perpetrator had obviously worn gloves and left no fingerprints. With traces of shoes, everything was much more difficult because the house was visited by a dozen doctors who rendered assistance and took out the victims. Now it was necessary to collect all the footprints there and to find out which of them did not belong to the medics, Torgny or the victims themselves. The law enforcers were afraid that the criminal, having learned that Emma had survived, might sneak into the hospital and finish what he had started. After all, she was a crucial witness, and in case she came to her senses and could testify, she would certainly give him away. Therefore, a 24-hour guard was posted outside Youngstig's room. At the same time, neighbors were interviewed in search of possible witnesses. One woman recalled that at around 05 in the evening, a stranger in black clothes was walking around Emma and Torgny's house. She thought it was strange, but she could not see the man's face because it was hidden by a hood. However, the neighbor suggested that it could be a girl because the figure was short and fragile. The same figure in black clothes and with a hood on his head also got into the lens of the street surveillance camera, located on the store a couple of minutes' walk from the scene of the crime. It also appeared to law enforcement that the woman in the video was a short, frail-looking girl. But who was she, and why would she wish harm on Emma and her children? The recording decided to show Torgny and to find out his opinion about who the stranger could be and whether he has any assumptions about it. Already from the first frames, the man began to change in his face, turned pale, and then said that it could be his ex-girlfriend, 31-year-old Christina Shurer, although he could not say for sure. Who is Christina Shurer? Torgny's former sweetheart was born in Hanover, Germany in 1977. When she was still a child, her father left the family and practically stopped communicating with his daughter, which negatively affected her mental state and behavior. The girl grew up willful and purposeful, but had a complex character. As a teenager, she went to the United States on an exchange program and lived in New York for several years. The girl received a good education in the field of history and archaeology, traveled extensively throughout Europe, taking part in excavations and expeditions. In the summer of 2006, she went to Greece, to the island of Crete, where she got a job in one of the popular hotels as a tour guide. There in July came on vacation 26-year-old Torgny, who immediately attracted Christina. He also liked this smart, interesting, and educated girl with whom he had an affair from the first days of acquaintance. Shurer at that time was 29 years old, but a small age difference did not embarrass the couple. Their connection lasted for a week while the guy was vacationing in the hotel, and after his departure they continued to communicate by phone and correspond on the internet. A few months later, Christina came to Hellberg in Sweden and literally asked to stay at his house. Even then, such behavior seemed to Torgny too intrusive and even tactless. So when Christina offered him a weekend trip to the mountains, he refused and sincerely hoped that this was the last time they would meet. But the girl continued to call, write, and insist on a new meeting. In January 2007, during a phone conversation, Torgny told Christina that everything was over between them and they should not meet again, but Christina pretended not to hear it. She continued to call, asking to come to visit him, and calling Torgny to go on vacation with her. In the spring of 2007, Christina again came to Sweden and began to literally stalk the former boyfriend. She persuaded him to resume their relationship, although he honestly admitted that he is already dating another Then Christina said that during the previous visit, forgot in his house something of the things, and she needs to take them away. Torgny agreed, but as soon as they crossed the threshold, the former lover tried to seduce him, and having received a firm refusal, said that he will still regret. 3 months later, Christina returned again and began to apologize for her behavior, again persuading the guy to get together, but he rejected her, and in the evening she called, saying that she swallowed pills because she does not want to live without him. Helberg called her an ambulance and also called her family, telling them about Christina's antics and advising them to see a psychiatrist. After Shurer received the necessary care at the hospital, her mother took her away and placed her in a psychiatric hospital, where she spent more than a month. However, the treatment did not give much results, and the girl remained literally obsessed with her former lover, constantly thinking about how to get him back and inventing new reasons for meetings. In October 2007, Christina decided to move to Sweden and settled in the suburbs of Stockholm, where she rented an apartment with another girl. She started to pursue her ex-boyfriend again, and when she got to meet him, she told him that she had given birth to a son by him, but gave the child to a foster family. Torgny was shocked by this news, but what he was most interested in was when it had happened. The last time they had been intimate was more than a year ago, and after that, they had met 3 more times at different times, but Christine had shown no signs of pregnancy. She herself answered evasively, and each time added some new details. In January 2008, after a dozen unsuccessful attempts to meet with Torgny, Christina wrote him a message in which she told him that their son had been diagnosed with a certain hereditary disease, and now they should go to Germany together to see him. She also added that the child's adoptive father would contact him and give him the details. At this time, she and Emma were in the process of moving to a new home, and the girlfriend was aware of the whole story. She believed that Tony's ex-girlfriend was simply trying to lure him to Germany, and no son had ever existed. When Tony received a call from a man who introduced himself as the adoptive father of her and Christine's child, Tony, on Emma's advice, began to ask questions about when the boy was born, in which hospital it happened, and so on. The interlocutor was clearly annoyed, avoided answering in every possible way, and then, and after all, hung up the phone. So Helberg finally came to the conclusion that no son never existed. Christine made up the whole story and asked someone from the acquaintances to play along. Christina's arrest and the search for evidence. After learning such a convoluted story, detectives quickly found out where the new suspect lived and went to the address. The door was opened by her roommate, who told them that Christina had hurriedly packed her things the day before and said that she was going back to Germany. A check showed that the girl had indeed left the country, so now the Swedish police had to seek help from their German colleagues to arrest her. On March 20th, a warrant was issued for her arrest. When the suspect was arrested, she claimed that there had been a mistake and that she had nothing to do with the massacre. But after she was taken to Sweden on March 29th, she immediately requested a meeting with Torgny, which was denied. She was completely calm, but periodically asked to meet or call her ex again. Christina's rented apartment was thoroughly searched, and her phone and laptop were seized for inspection. All her clothes were thoroughly checked, but no traces of blood were found there. By then, investigators had worked out which of the bloody shoe prints at the scene did not belong to the medics and family members, so it was determined to be athletic, and from the tread pattern they even figured out the brand and appearance. The size matched the one worn by the suspect, but she herself claimed that she never had such a model of sneakers. However, this statement was quickly refuted, as the shoes were identified by her roommate. Much more interesting findings awaited detectives in Christina's laptop. It was full of photos of Torgny, both their joint, and those where the man was depicted alone or in the company of his new lover. Also, in a separate folder with a very unpleasant signature, contained pictures of Emma and her children, which the suspect copied from the rival's page in the social network. Shurer captioned each photo with insulting, threatening, and downright scary captions. In the recovered search history were found requests on how to commit a murder without leaving traces, how to hide traces of the crime, and how to divert suspicion from himself. Also in the notes, investigators found a plan of Emma and Torney's new home and notes that indicated when the man left for work and what time he returned, and some other notes regarding the family's daily routine. Interview with survivor. Emma's condition was stabilized, her vitals gradually began to improve, and towards the end of March, doctors decided to gradually bring her out of the medically induced coma. Upon awakening, she was still unable to speak because of the breathing tube, but her gaze was meaningful. It was clear that she recognized the relatives present in the room, but did not understand what had happened to her and how she had ended up in the hospital. As soon as the victim became a little stronger and was able to speak clearly, the police agreed to talk to her, but decided not to tell her what had happened to the children. And then it turned out that Emma had no memory of the events of that fateful day, and believed that she must have been in a car accident. She kept asking about the children and whether they were all right. At first, she was given evasive answers, but then her family and medical team decided that there was no point in withholding such information. When Emma was told about what had happened and that her babies were no longer alive, she became hysterical. The doctors had to sedate her, after which she fell asleep, and when she woke up, she did not remember the conversation and asked about the children again. This continued for several weeks, and during this time, the mother was told several times about the death of her daughter and son, but her brain apparently refused to accept this information, each time erasing it. After another month, Emma, accompanied by medics, decided to be brought to the scene. Once inside the house, she suddenly remembered everything. The young woman told how she was texting with her sister, setting the table, and the children were playing near her when there was a knock on the door. She opened the door and saw a dark, short female figure on the threshold, but when she asked what she wanted, she felt a sharp pain and her eyes went black. The figure skulked into the house, and the desperate mother, out of her last strength, tried to catch up with her to protect her children, but apparently fell in the hallway, where they tried to finish her off. The trial and the verdict. Christina continued to stubbornly deny her guilt. The weapon of the crime was never found, and almost all the evidence found was circumstantial, which gave her a high chance of getting away with it. However, Christina's roommate, when questioned, said that in March a hammer was missing from her toolkit. She produced the toolkit itself, and the investigation determined that the size and configuration of that brand of tool matched the murder weapon. But that evidence was also circumstantial. Detectives were able to find surveillance footage from a suburban bus station, where Shurer had traveled 3 times in the week before the crime. She herself could not explain why she visited Arbuga so often, but apparently the girl came to keep an eye on her future victims. The suspect was also unable to explain why she was searching the internet for information on how to cover up the crime and why she was collecting photos of Emma and her children. On July 29, 2008, the trial over Christina, who was accused of double murder with particular cruelty as well as attempted murder, began. The defendant herself behaved more than strangely. Upon entering the courtroom, she smiled and began to wave her hand, greeting those present. When she was asked questions about the massacre and was shown gruesome footage of the crime scene with mutilated bodies, she suddenly laughed. This suggested that the defendant was insane, but the appointed psychiatric examination established that the girl was sane and perfectly aware of what was happening. Consequently, she enjoyed what she had done and did not even try to hide it. When Emma was in the courtroom and saw Christina there, she fainted. When she was brought to her senses, she said that she finally remembered everything, and this face was the last thing she saw on that fateful day. Despite the defense lawyer's attempts to prove her client's innocence, the jury unanimously found her guilty on all counts. Christina was sentenced to life in prison with no right to ever be released. She was also ordered to pay 20,000 euros in compensation to Emma. No evidence was found that Christina had ever been pregnant and had given birth to a son by Torgny. As for young Stig, her recovery process was long and arduous, but Torgny did not abandon his beloved. They were married in the summer of 2010. The couple are now raising two common heirs who know the sad story of their older brother and sister. On January 12, 2023, CBS News Minnesota aired a 24-second clip of the death of gray-haired old man Donald Blom. He died on January 10, 2023, at the age of 73 from natural causes consistent with age. But who was this old man who made it into the news summary? Donald Blom is a brutal maniac and criminal who served a life sentence in prison and despite his deeds died his death. Donald Blom's death brings to an end a long-running saga of violence and depravity that began in the 1970s and saw him commit a series of heinous crimes, culminating in the brutal murder of Kathy Poirier. Despite his long history of violence, Blom managed to evade justice for years until a chance encounter led to his capture and punishment. He began his crime spree in 1975 when he kidnapped a young girl. The pervert gagged her and took advantage of her, then locked her in the trunk of his car, but the girl was not timid, and she managed to escape and later handed over to the police criminal. Blom was tried and found guilty, but the punishment was too lenient, and in 1978, when he was free, he again committed aggravated assault. In 1983, he was arrested for criminal sexual conduct. That same year, he threatened two young girls in a remote area with a knife, tied them to a tree and stuffed socks in their mouths. He choked and revived one of them several times and repeated that he was going to do something terrible to them. The girls were rescued when a police patrol saw their improperly parked car and responded quickly to find the owner. Blom then fled into the woods and later changed his appearance by dyeing his hair. He was arrested 2 months later. When one of the girls recognized him, he pleaded guilty to the crime, but the newly received punishment did not reform him. During an examination in 1992, the psychologist concluded that without close supervision and monitoring, Blom would resume antisocial behavior in the near future. Antisocial behaviors are actions that are harmful or disregard the mental state of others, which is exactly the state the psychologist predicted Donald would be in. However, Blom managed to change his name, get a job, and get married. By May 1999, he had 6 felony convictions on his record, 5 of which involved kidnapping and violence. But who is Donald Blom, and where does the cruelty and desire to dominate others come from in an ordinary man? Let's get to the bottom of it, because perhaps the answer lies in the man's rather troubled early years. Donald Alban Blom was born on February 5, 1949, in the state of Minnesota. He was an American by nationality. Blom had a troubled childhood as he was often abused by his father from his early age until his teenage years. By then, Donald Blom was already drinking heavily and exhibiting behavioral problems, and in 10th grade he went to a reform school where he often skipped classes. The trauma of a violent relationship with his father is likely what led him to develop behavioral and alcohol problems. This was especially evident as he entered puberty. But let's take a closer look at this story through the eyes of a mentally healthy person and ponder where the chain of events that led to the man's disappearance broke down. On May 26, 1999, Caitlin Poirier was working the night shift alone at a convenience store at a service station. After midnight, a customer of the store called the police to report that the clerk was gone. Police officers who arrived on the scene found the store was indeed empty. They checked the surveillance video and saw a large man holding Katie by the neck lead her out of the store around 11:40 p.m. He was wearing jeans, a backwards baseball cap, and a New York Yankees jersey with the number 23 on the back. The fragile young woman was apparently forced out of the store. Catherine Honeck, an employee of the Subway restaurant that was next to the store from which the girl disappeared, was questioned by police. She said that shortly before the Subway store closed around 10 p.m., she saw a man acting strangely. After closing, Honeck drove home, and coincidentally, she encountered the man who was leaving the store on the road. She noted that the stranger was driving a black Ford F-150 pickup truck with an extended cab with white markings on the side. The pickup truck looped around the maintenance area several times before entering Moose Lake and stopping in the parking lot of a local cafe. Honeck also reported that Kathy's car was still in the parking lot when she left work. Based on her description and partially recovered surveillance camera footage, a rough sketch of the kidnapper was made. He had long blonde hair and appeared to be about 25 years old. A composite sketch was made from 4 witness statements and was broadcast on local television and placed in local newspapers asking for information. While clues were being gathered, hundreds of people arrived from across the state to help circle the wooded area around the station in search of the kidnapped Kathy Poirier. Police used service dogs and helicopters, but found nothing. Posters of Kathy appeared in many newspapers and on billboards throughout the region, turning her story into a high-profile missing persons case. The local sex offender facility, which was located near the store where Katie went missing, reported that all inmates were accounted for. The information provided was accurate, which completely ruled out a kidnapping by a fugitive offender. Police officers began searching for the vehicle by license plate number and came up with Donald Blom, but unfortunately, the truck in his driveway was white in color. On June 6, 1999, the official search ended without success, but many volunteers continued to look for the girl. They believed that at least someone somewhere had seen something that would make the right connection and bring the girl home. Whether the perpetrator was brave or foolish for daring to take the girl out of a store equipped with a security camera, investigators were looking for at least one more mistake he would make. The searchers emphasized the neighborhood itself. After all, if the perpetrator was in this fairly remote area at night and returned to the store twice, it was likely that he knew the area very well, which meant that someone must have seen the man before the crime. A search headquarters was set up at the Lutheran Church in Moose Lake, with staff members assisting in processing leads and volunteers handing out flyers describing Katie. On the wall were maps with large crosses marking the areas that searchers had already traversed. But despite the efforts and hopes of many, Katie never turned up, suggesting that the kidnapper might be an athlete or a fan of the New York Yankees team. The police sought the help of a sports figure. 2 weeks passed, but still no result. The police asked Minnesota Twins legend Paul Molitor to make a public service announcement. His appeal to Minnesotans across the state caught the attention of Darrell Brown, who worked at the Minnesota Veterans Home. On June 18th, he called the hotline to report his co-worker Donald Hutchinson, who had recently stopped driving his black pickup truck and was described as looking like a composite sketch. He had been absent the day after the abduction and had recently gotten a haircut. Investigation revealed that Donald Hutchinson was actually Donald Blom and had a black pickup truck carefully hidden in his garage. He also owned property 12 miles from the store in Moose Lake where Kathy worked. During further digging, investigators learned that Blom had been convicted of sex crimes, specifically kidnapping petite young girls like Katie. Detectives worked quickly to get a search warrant. Agents from the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension went looking for Blom and found him and his family at a campground 140 miles outside of Richfield. Agents woke him up early in the morning to ask him some questions. He was brought in for questioning. Further inspection revealed that Blom had purchased property in Moose Lake about 2 years ago. Neighbors confirmed that he had been there frequently before Katie's abduction, but had not been there since. Blom's supervisor at the veterans' home said he was unaware of the man's criminal record because he used the name Hutchinson. He said Blom always kept to himself and didn't socialize much with people. After his arrest, Donald Blom was friendly and cooperative, but then he refused to testify and asked for an attorney. Meanwhile, authorities organized a series of searches that left them in shock. Various items were seized from Blom's home, but no official statement was given as to what the items were or how they figured in the investigation. Another search was conducted on Blom's 20-acre property in Moose Lake, involving more than 100 National Guard members and several hundred volunteers. They marched several miles from his property into the woods, but as darkness fell, they had to leave. The next morning, the search resumed with renewed vigor, and Katie's mother said she had a gut feeling that they would find her daughter alive. Apparently, some hoped the girl was being held somewhere against her will, but the sheriff was less optimistic. On the morning of the second day, searchers found bone-like fragments among the ashes in a fire pit on Donald Blom's property. They were sent to the lab for further testing, and to everyone's shock, they were identified as bone fragments, and a tooth found in the ashes was also sent to odontologists, experts in dental remains. Certified forensic dentist Dr. Ann Norlander conducted a time-consuming and expensive examination of the tooth. She knew that under the conditions under which it was extracted, any DNA that could have been extracted from the pulp of the tooth would have been destroyed, so she had to resort to other methods. When she came across something that looked like a filling, it confirmed that it was a human tooth and allowed her to determine if it could have belonged to Katie. Dental fillings are made up of an organic matrix and an inorganic filler. The organic matrix burns away, leaving behind particles of the filler. This allows the analyst to identify a brand, or at least a group of brands. Manufacturers use as many as 50 different types of fillers, any one of which will show up vividly on dental x-rays. The composition of the filling of the tooth from Blom's fire pit matched the composition of the fillings used for Katie. In addition, researchers were able to identify it as tooth 18 and determine that it belonged to a young woman. The likelihood that it had once been in Kathy's mouth and not someone else from the area was quite high. One major question remains unanswered. Why did the perpetrator get out of prison after kidnapping 7 different girls? If the justice system had worked better, Katie might still be alive. Instead, Blom was able to change his name and shake off the stain of his criminal past, get a job, get married, and become a new identity as a cover to continue causing harm. In the case of Katie Poirier, Blom was charged with kidnapping and unlawful possession of a firearm, which is a federal charge. Given his prior convictions, Blom was not allowed to carry a firearm. He was offered a plea agreement, but he didn't want to even talk. But then he changed his mind and said he was willing to testify, with the condition that he call home. On September 8th, Blom made a tearful confession that lasted 2.5 hours. He said that on that day, May 26, 1999, he went fishing and then drove home to Richfield. Later that evening, however, he returned to his home on Moose Lake. On the way, he stopped to buy liquor and have a beer at a bar. He saw Kathy in the store while she was doing business. He did not know her, but grabbed her and forcibly put her in his pickup truck. He then drove her to his motorhome. "I don't know if it was just out of guilt or something else or because I felt stupid," he said, "but then I strangled her and killed her." He strangled her from behind, saying it took about 20 minutes. He did not admit to any other type of assault. Once he knew she was dead, Blom placed her body in a fire pit in the fetal position and then gathered wood and paper to make it burn. But Blom's account clearly contradicted the video camera footage and the discovery in the burn pit. Blom claimed that he remembered her asking him several times to let her go, although she did not struggle with him until he began choking her on his property. He said he managed to kill her with his bare hands. His account of burning the remains was also not realistic enough, as wood and paper alone could not have reached a high enough temperature to turn a human body to ashes. When prodded, he admitted that none of this made much sense to him. He just didn't know why he did it. When the interview was over, Blom called 2 local television stations to report what he had done and asked that the reporters leave his family alone. The deal also returned confiscated property to his wife, Amy Blom, including a parcel of land on Moose Lake, a home in Richfield in the family car. For the Poirier family, the confession was devastating because they had hoped Kathy was still alive. Blom now claimed that she had been murdered and cremated for no reason other than his nocturnal impulse, which he could not explain. Blom soon recanted, saying he made a false confession due to the stress of solitary confinement and the medication he was taking. He said he was hallucinating and believed the only way to escape from the cell was to tell the authorities what they wanted to hear. But he was out of his mind, he now claimed, and didn't know what he was saying. The plea bargain had been canceled, and lawyers for both sides were preparing for trial. There are different types of false confessions, and sometimes people just spontaneously confess to something they did not do. This usually happens in response to a high-profile case. Some people expect the interrogation to be too intense, so they quickly succumb to the pressure to confess. But there is another type of phenomenon that can occur. People may internalize assertions of guilt from the police and come to believe that they have committed a crime that they were not involved in. Whether Blom actually confessed to perjury or recanted his testimony is now for the jury to decide. Blom was brought to trial. The trial began in June 2000 and took 5 weeks for jury selection. The trial took another 5 weeks, during which more than 50 witnesses, including several key witnesses, were called to testify. The case was opened by Carleton County Assistant Prosecuting Attorney Thomas Pertler. Among the first witnesses, Blom's brother testified that he had given the family a box of old clothes, including a New York Yankees jersey. Blom had previously said he had never owned such a shirt. Even more damaging was the testimony of 2 women whom Blom kidnapped in 1983, who agreed to testify about how he treated them. The jury learned firsthand what he was capable of. Both women, being young girls at the time, looked like Kathy. Forensic odontologists then confirmed that the partial tooth matched Kathy's age, gender, and dental records. Dr. Ann Norlander admitted that at first she was not sure it was even a tooth. At the hearing, she testified that with a reasonable degree of medical certainty, the tooth belonged to Kathy. It was the discovery of chemicals in the filling material that led her to that conclusion. A surveillance video from another store that captured Blom back in May showed that around the time of the kidnapping, his hair, now gray, had blonde tips, as his barber confirmed, making him look younger. Most revealing was Blom's confession, which the judge allowed into evidence. Each juror was given a transcript for further review. Thereafter, there was silence in the courtroom, save for the quiet sobs of Kathy's relatives. The case against Blom seemed pretty strong at that point. Rodney Broughton, lead defense attorney, called his first witness on August 7th. Amy Blom testified that her husband was home the night Katie disappeared. Speaking from the bench, she said she guessed where her husband was that day because she saw a broadcast the next day about the girl's disappearance. She called attention to it because the location of her disappearance was near the country house they owned on Moose Lake, 110 miles from their home. Because Blom had a criminal record, she figured he would be a suspect, so she later realized exactly where he had been the night before. Blom returned home at 9:30 p.m., and they had already gone to bed. When his spouse woke up in the morning, coffee was ready, his spouse was home. She also testified that the police officers bullied her, threatening to take her children away if she didn't answer questions the way they wanted her to. "They called me a liar," she said. She also denied that she had ever seen a baseball jersey in the clothes her son-in-law gave them, and said she had never seen her husband wear one. As she spoke, Blom wept, visibly wiping his eyes. On August 10th, Blom took the stand in his own defense. Under oath, he denied that he had kidnapped Kathy Poirier. He remained on the witness stand for more than 3 hours, alternately talking and crying. He claimed that his life was falling apart, and he felt ill at the time he admitted to the investigation that he had committed the crime. He added that his wife was threatening to leave his life due to media pressure, so he decided to do everything he could to free himself from the cell he was imprisoned in. He spent quite a bit of time trying to get the jury to feel sorry for him, as if he was the victim. He agreed that he had made a confession, but said he had also recanted it. He now claimed that he was not at Moose Lake the night of the crime, but rather he was sleeping at home with his wife, as she had told him. Although he had been fishing there earlier in the evening, he was home at 10 p.m., well before Katie was taken from the store. Later on cross-examination, Blom was forced to admit the lies and inconsistencies in his statements to the police at the beginning of the investigation, so appearing in court did him no good. To many, he appeared to be a whiner trying to get away with it once again. When the questioning ended, Blom looked frustrated. He turned to the judge, cursed, and asked if he could only make one statement. After a negative answer, the case went to the jury. After 10 hours of deliberation, 3 of which were spent replaying the taped confessions, the jury found Donald Blom guilty. He received a life sentence without parole. Blom continued to insist that it wasn't over and predicted that one day he would be exonerated. "I never killed anyone," he insisted. He was sure he had a strong case for appeal. But in 2004, the appeals court issued an 81-page ruling that upheld the conviction. Although his trial was not perfect, the judges decided it had been fair. They saw no reason to overturn the ruling or order a new trial. The murder of Caitlin Poirier led to the passage of Katie's Law, which included the development of a statewide computerized crime-fighting network, tightening the requirements for tracking predatory sex offenders like Blom.
Mom is a special person in the life of each of us. In all languages, this word sounds affectionate and tender because it carries only goodness and understanding. Mommy is the only word a person shouts in moments of pain, fear, or joy. But unfortunately, children are not always the most important thing in a mother's life. A high-profile crime that took place in 2016 in one of the largest states in the United States, Texas, has progressed throughout the country. A young and successful 42-year-old woman, Christy Sheets, shot and killed her 2 adult daughters in the backyard of her home. But why? Let's start at the beginning and try to figure out what led a loving mother to such a cruel act. Christy Bird was born in the city of Decatur, Alabama in 1974 in the family of Rebecca Bird. The girl's parents separated when she was very young. Mom Christy had to work hard to provide a poverty-free existence for her child. The main role in the upbringing of Christy took her grandfather. The girl adored her grandfather because he pampered her and taught her unusual things, such as how to hold a gun. The retired officer had an impressive collection of weapons. The 2 of them would lock themselves in a semi-basement dark room where they would spend hours looking at the treasures under her grandfather's fascinating stories. From early childhood, a person tries to find out his place in life, learns to build relationships with others, receives education for further application of the knowledge gained in real life. But Christy did not strive for knowledge. Although she studied in one of the best schools in the state, the study was not interested in the young rebel. Constant clashes with peers severely traumatized her childhood psyche. As a result of regular attacks and difficulties with classmates, Christy barely finishes school. After school, Christy moves to the northern part of Alabama in Lawrence County to attend university. Here, she takes a job as a secretary at a transportation company where she meets Jason Sheets, a young and promising specialist. The young people spend hours walking around the city. They hike together. They go on vacation to Christy's hometown. A strong and long-lasting relationship develops between them. After a few years, they get married and move to Kathy's town. On one of the quietest streets of the city, the young family buys a house. On April 19, 1994, their first daughter, Taylor, was born. Jason was happy because he had always dreamed of a little daughter. The Sheets family was quite well-to-do and happy. Jason worked successfully in a large oil and gas company as an IT consultant. Christy raised her daughter and was an exemplary housewife. On October 21, 1998, Christy and Jason had a second daughter who was named Madison. Family life went on in a calm and measured way. Jason was working. Christy was taking care of the children. Until tragedy struck, which once and for all changed the former way of life of the family. In 2012, Christy's grandfather died. She loved him like the father she never had. The woman had a very hard time experiencing such a great loss. The family idol was replaced by psychologists and antidepressants, but just 2 months later, still not recovered from the loss of her grandfather, Christy's mother dies. Another tragedy morally kills the woman, and she gets into a clinic with a mental disorder for the first time. One clinic is replaced by another. Antidepressants are replaced by hard alcohol. Christy's internal state remains very unstable and vulnerable for a long time. Husband and daughters, for a long time in every possible way, try to support a dear and beloved person. After a while, they seem to succeed. Christy returns to her old life. She gets a job as a manager in a laser cosmetology clinic where they specialize in the removal of tattoos. Work takes up all her time, while her beloved husband and daughters try to occupy her heart and thoughts. On September 25, 2015, the day of her daughters, Christy posts a picture of Taylor and Madison on her Facebook page. She captions it with a declaration of motherly love. Christy called her children amazing, sweet, kind, beautiful, and smart girls. "You have no idea how much I love and cherish you," Christy wrote at the time, addressing her daughters. In January of that year, she published another strong post, already in defense of her right to bear arms. A post whose photo showed a polished gun on a table and 7 bullets next to it. "I have 10 guns. Obama wants 8 of my guns. How many guns do I have?" Responding to the comments, she writes, "That's right, I have 10 guns." Christy Sheets has been a vocal supporter of legislation to make firearms widely available to the public. In particular, she was against the Democratic Party's initiative to ban the free trade of semi-automatic handguns. Christy claimed it would violate her family's right to defend themselves. How ironic that in the end, Christy Sheets' love and admiration for and staunch defense of guns, and her belief in the right to bear arms, led to the tragic loss of her 2 daughters and her own life. On June 24, 2016, Jason's birthday, Christy called her daughters over for a family dinner. That night, the entire family gathered in the living room. But instead of a celebratory dinner, Jason wanted to inform his daughters of his impending divorce. Christy overheard their conversation. An uproar broke out in the living room. She was yelling. She cursed. Then she left. Jason tried to calm the girls down, promised things would get better. But Christy came back with a gun in her hand. Jason covered the children. Screaming and panic took over the house. Madison hid behind the couch and discreetly called emergency services. When the dispatcher answered, the girl was overtaken by her mother. Mommy, don't shoot, don't shoot." Wheezing, moaning, silence, a voice was heard again. "Don't shoot, there are children. I'll do what you want, don't shoot." The call was interrupted. In the second call, made by 22-year-old Taylor, she is unable to speak or relay information to the dispatcher. She was completely stumped by the incredible chaos that was unfolding in the family home. Taylor was shot twice by her mother, who fired the fatal shot as her daughter was dying on the ground outside the family home. Holding a gun, Christy simply fired it several times at Taylor and Madison. At 5 p.m., police arrived at the scene of the tragedy after several 911 calls. Near Christy and Jason's home, police officers saw the bodies of 17-year-old Madison Sheets and 22-year-old Taylor Sheets on the ground. Christy was standing over Madison's body with a gun in her hand. She was clearly about to fire another shot at the girl. The police officer, not knowing if the victim was alive, ordered her to drop the weapon immediately. Christy ignored this demand, at which point the officers opened fire at point-blank range. The woman was killed at the scene. An examination of the victims revealed that 17-year-old Madison died instantly from her injuries, and 22-year-old Taylor was wounded. She was flown by helicopter to the hospital, but unfortunately, her life could not be saved. So for both daughters, the injuries inflicted by their own mother proved fatal. The only survivor of the massacre was 45-year-old Jason Sheets. Christy shot him too, but he managed to take refuge in the house of neighbors, who asked him to call the police. The neighbors heard him pleading with Christy, "Don't hurt them, they're our kids." But Christy didn't heed those words. Instead, she fired a couple of bullets in Jason's direction. Only a lucky break saved him from death. However, the police were not immediately able to question Jason about the reasons for the incident. When the police arrived at the scene, they immediately sent him to the hospital in a state of deep shock. The area near the house where the family tragedy played out was cordoned off. Shocked neighbors and random witnesses were repeatedly questioned. As interviews began, it was most accurately established that at first there were sounds of bickering coming from the house. Then, according to witnesses concerned about what was happening, Christy began beating the girls. Then, taking a .38 caliber shotgun, she shot Madison and then Taylor at point-blank range. The girls, bleeding, ran out of the house. Madison managed to take only a few steps before falling to the ground and collapsing in agony. Seeing this, the mother fired another shot in Taylor's direction. She fell, and Christy went inside the house and cold-bloodedly reloaded the shotgun and finished her off with a point-blank shot. Witnesses said Christy acted in cold blood and without emotion. After the first shots rang out back in the living room of the home, all family members ran outside. It was a family argument that escalated into a shooting, but we're still trying to piece everything together. That was the first version of what happened, voiced for the TV news crews that arrived at the scene of the tragedy. What drove 42-year-old Christy Bird Sheets to commit this unthinkably brutal crime? The detectives don't know the exact reasons. All they have at their disposal are dry facts. So, police say, in the house of the family Sheets, not all was not well. Over several years, because of conflicts between family members, to Sheets more than a dozen times called the police patrol. In the end, Christy's husband and father of both girls, 45-year-old Jason Sheets, could not stand it and left his wife. But he did return to her recently. On the day of the tragedy, the entire family gathered for dinner at Christy's invitation. Even Taylor, a college student after a recent fight with her mother, came home to celebrate Jason's birthday with her family. Shocked observers and acquaintances of the family were shocked by what happened. How and why did a mother kill her own daughters? Neighbor Gino Hernandez recalls the Sheets family. I knew both girls since they were 10 years old, the man said, wiping away tears. They were always nice, outgoing girls. Always waved and said hello when they walked by. The other thing is Christy. She wouldn't even stop by the barbecue. It was always like she was on her own. Wonderful girls, and Jason's a good guy too, another neighbor asserted. Their problems were all about Christy. The investigation also agrees with the neighbors. It has already been revealed that Christy had conflicts with both daughters before. Also, official authorities have already reported that Christy suffered from mental illness. On June 29, 2016, at the first press conference, Sheriff Troy Niels told reporters that the 42-year-old mother was depressed and had made repeated attempts to take her own life because she was on the verge of divorcing her husband. According to the police spokesman, the couple's marriage began to crumble back in 2012. Just then, the grandfather who raised Christy Sheets died. To kill family members, Mrs. Sheets used a gun, which she inherited from a deceased relative. Also, one of the possible reasons for the serious discord in the family, the sheriff called Christy's unwillingness to put up with the upcoming marriage of her eldest daughter, Taylor. A few days before the shots were fired, Christy Sheets had an argument with her oldest daughter where she attempted to apply house arrest to Taylor and forbid her from seeing her fiancé. Jason did not agree with his wife that house arrest was an appropriate punishment for a 22-year-old girl, noted Nels. Juan Sebastian Logo, 23, and Taylor Sheets, 22, were in the same year of college in the art department. The young people had been dating for 4 years. On social media, they showed how in love they were and how they were preparing for their upcoming wedding. A small wedding ceremony was planned for June 27th. It has been suggested that the mother may have objected to the marriage of Taylor and Sebastian, who was of Hispanic descent. Disagreeing with his wife, Jason Sheets insisted that incarcerating their eldest daughter was inappropriate punishment for an adult. Later, Jason Sheets would still testify, telling investigators that his wife had called their daughters to inform them of the divorce. She had been notified of it, but instead of explaining in front of the children, she pointed a gun at them and shot them several times. But she did not shoot her husband. As Mr. Sheets stated, the wife's motive was that she wanted to make him suffer.
According to Jason Sheets, his wife's downward spiral began in 2012 after she lost her grandfather and then lost her mother just 2 months later. Apparently, the gun she used to kill her daughters was a gift from her grandfather. Jason Sheets revealed that his wife applied for a license to carry a gun, but was denied because of her mental illness. This begs the question, what did Christy Sheets think could have triggered the need to punish her husband and make him suffer? Was it the breakdown of their marriage, the feeling that control and valor in her life had been lost, hinted at in a cluster of Facebook rants where Christy talked about protecting herself and her family? Or could Christy Sheets' decision to kill her daughters have been driven in some way by medication or the continued deterioration of her mental state? Jason Sheets told police that his wife suffered from depression. She was taking prescribed pills by the handful and seeing a therapist. She had been treated 3 times in recent years after attempting to leave her life at a private psychiatric hospital, Sheriff Nels reported. Christy Sheets had ample time and opportunity to kill her husband, but she didn't. Jason realized that Christy wanted him to suffer, Sheriff Nels said, echoing Jason Sheets, recounting the details of the incident for the first time. Mr. Sheets revealed that Christy knew about how much he loved Taylor and Madison and how much they loved him, Nels continued. Perhaps the complete rift in the family and the realization that she was losing not only her husband, but her daughters as well, exacerbated Christy's already difficult emotional state, and she grabbed a gun, foreshadowing her tragic end as well. Madison Davey, a close family friend, gave a great interview in which he spoke about the relationships within the family. He was the best dad in the world. I used to hang out with them, and he loved being around us. They were so funny together. You'd think the sisters would fight, but no, Davey said. They loved each other very much and were always laughing. Davey went on to say that both daughters had a very close relationship with each other and with their father. Jason would do anything to protect them, and he tried to do that, but Christy was going to kill that day, Davey said. In one attempt to take her own life, Christy, perhaps only intimidating, pulled out a gun and said goodbye to her family with screams and tears. But she didn't get the desired effect. Jason replied indifferently, "If you want to just shoot yourself, don't touch us, just shoot yourself." But Christy replied, "No, that will be your punishment." Relatives, friends, and acquaintances were sure that something was bound to happen in this family, but no one could think that a woman would kill her daughters. Christy was bringing harm to her family. She was mentally unstable. The sheriff's department explained that police officers were repeatedly called to the home of Christy and Jason, who were having violent arguments. Since January 2012, police have received 14 calls for service. 3 of them involved Christy threatening to take her own life, having previously been diagnosed with mental health issues. Juan Sebastian's inconsolable sister Maria stated that the Sheets sisters were some of the sweetest, most sensible and kind-hearted girls she had ever met. Today, Mariah found it hard to believe that not so long ago, she and Taylor were having carefree fun at a party and looking forward to her wedding day to Sebastian. "You've already become a member of our family, and that will remain the same," she addresses her friend. "You were a light in this crazy world, and we will always remember you."
That day of the brutal crime, where the lives of young girls with everything ahead of them were cut short, has long stirred the public. People grieved with Jason. Older sister Taylor Sheets went to school, worked as a caregiver for Care.com, and dreamed of a long, happy life with the man she loved. Younger sister, Madison, studied at school, and at the same time worked as a nanny. On the day of the funeral of the girls mourned the whole city. Social networks and TV news channels again covered this terrible event. Is it possible that the reason for such a terrible tragedy is the availability of guns? The unwillingness of the states to finally take up and address the issue of firearms sales has once again led to another tragedy. An ordinary Texas woman, Christy Sheets, shot and killed her own 2 daughters during a domestic dispute. Such cases are not surprising for the U.S. As long as Republicans and Democrats are pulling the cat by the tail, not even trying to come to a compromise, people will die. The exact causes of the conflict that led to such tragic consequences will remain unknown. However, it is enough that the police came to this house more than once because of regular conflicts. That is, it was already clear that the family was dysfunctional, but they were still left with guns. To summarize, I would like to go back to the beginning of this story. A mother is the closest and dearest person to her children, and children are the most important thing in life for a mother. The case of Christy Sheets is an exception rather than a reality. Amidst her inner heartache, her maternal instinct seems to have completely shut down and no one was able to stop her. But Christy's plan is fully realized. After the murder of his daughters, Jason Sheets will have to live with those horrible memories for the rest of his life.